Chapter 578. Lord Wolf was talking non-stop. He said things like, "I knew the mandate of heaven and young Master Li would come." Now that he heard Li Yunxin's question, his smile froze on his face. He frowned and shook his ears. "What? I'm asking you. You said nice to meet you, and nice to meet you. And about meeting me 3 times in this hut tonight, who told you? Who taught you to do that?" Li Yunxin repeated patiently. "Was it that old ghost?" Lord Wolf frowned. His nose, which was shorter than a wolf's but longer than a human's, wrinkled fiercely. He even showed his canine teeth and said in a low voice, "What are you talking about? No one taught me. I am the son of heaven. I was born knowing." At this time he finally realized that something was wrong. "Who are you people? Huh? Who sent you?" Li Yunxin looked at him. "Stupid dog. You were used. I'll capture you first." Lord Wolf suddenly became furious. Low-level demons like him were only at the transcendent state. It was the most convenient to show his true form during a fight. Lord Wolf planned to do the same. But before he showed his true form, he did one more thing than the other demons that Li Yunxin had seen. He first tore off the green robe and threw it on the ground. With an angry roar, he suddenly transformed into a giant wolf that was 10 feet tall. "So that person also told you that someone might come looking for you?" Li Yunxin stood in front of the giant wolf and smiled. "I guessed right." As soon as he finished speaking, the giant wolf opened its mouth and bit down. That mouth could swallow him whole. But what happened next was no surprise. With a raise of his hand, he slammed the wolf head into the ground with a loud bang, causing a cloud of snow and mist to fly everywhere. The giant wolf was stunned for a moment. After a while, it remembered to kick its 4 legs. In the blink of an eye, it dug 4 deep holes in the ground. But compared to Li Yunxin, its strength was like an ant to an elephant. His head was firmly nailed, unable to move at all. He couldn't even speak and could only let out a low whimper from his throat. Li Yunxin pressed his head like he was pressing the head of an obedient puppy. She looked at him with pity. "I understand. That person might have always told you that you were the savior of the world, that you were favored by the heavens. Today you suddenly realized that something was wrong, so you became anxious. But there's nothing we can do about it. Reality is reality. The reality now is that if you don't tell the truth, not only will you lose your dream, you might even lose your life." At this moment he heard footsteps. Lord Wolf's low howl must have alerted the people outside. The one who rushed in first was the leader of the small monsters in black. Behind him were 4 small monsters covered in mud. They looked confused and did not know what was going on. When they saw the state of their Lord Wolf, they were even more confused. The black-clothed leader was more quick-witted. After staring blankly for a while, he finally asked in a trembling voice, "Great King, did something happen? What orders does the Great King have?" But Lord Wolf was pressed down by Li Yunxin, so he couldn't speak. He could only whimper, which was really embarrassing. Hearing this, the leader immediately said, If the Great King doesn't have any orders, we'll leave first." Hearing this, Lord Wolf's 4 legs moved even more violently. A thick tail swept the snow on the ground into the air. Then he remembered that his real body was pressed down and he could still transform into a human. He twisted his body and suddenly shrunk into a furry werewolf. Seeing that he gave in, Li Yunxin stopped. Seeing Lord Wolf sitting on the ground, panting, his eyes wide open. "You really are." He didn't say this to Li Yunxin, he looked outside. The Great King was really here. Li Yunxin immediately turned his head to look in the direction of Lord Wolf's gaze. He saw Old Ghost also rushing in, his face full of fear and surprise. Hearing Lord Wolf's words, the black-clothed leader immediately jumped up and pointed at Old Ghost. "It's you. Take him down, take him down, take him down." At this time Lu Gongzan also came in. But he knew that the demons here weren't a match for him and Li Yunxin, so he wasn't in a hurry. He could only make a bunch of people stay right under his nose, waiting for Brother Xian's order before he would take them away. But at this time something happened. When the 4 demons saw their master being pressed down by Li Yunxin, they knew that he wasn't someone to be trifled with. So they pretended to be friendly and wanted to slip away. But at this time the leader said to take down Old Ghost. This Old Ghost had been with them for a long time, so they knew that there was nothing to be afraid of. Since the Great King had spoken, they naturally had to perform well. Thus the 5 demons scrambled to be the first to pounce on the Old Ghost, while the latter was still staring with his eyes wide open. Only when he saw the 5 demons pouncing on him with bared fangs and brandished claws did he let out a scream, turned around and fled. Lu Gongzan frowned slightly, raised his hand and shot out a talisman to restrain Old Ghost. Unexpectedly, one of the demons tilted his body and was hit by the talisman. Like a wooden stake, he fell straight to the ground. Lu Gongzan wasn't in a hurry. He flicked his other finger and shot out a second talisman. This time they could see it clearly. The leader of the black-clothed group pushed another small demon to receive the talisman. He did this twice in a row as if he knew that he couldn't hide it. In a moment of desperation, he abandoned his body and rushed towards Lu Gongzan, shouting, "Old thing, you've treated me well. No matter what you do today, leave quickly." Lu Gongzan didn't care about this kind of trick. He snorted coldly, then threw the leader far away to the side. Then he pointed at Old Ghost. The ghost cultivator's body, which had already turned into a faint human figure, suddenly froze, as if the smoke had condensed into a substance in an instant. Then he fell to the ground with a stiff body. However, it seemed that Old Ghost had already done something at this moment. In Li Yunxin's extremely sharp perception, something under the ground first shook. The source of the tremor should be under the thatched cottage. Then in an instant, it suddenly spread in all directions, causing an even more violent tremor, and an even more terrifying energy burst out. Boom! Half of the valley was lifted into the sky. A huge amount of soil and sand splashed up like a wave, and the Wolf Lord, who had turned into a human figure, was also caught in it. Although Li Yunxin was standing a bit further away, he was also affected. At this moment, 2 thoughts flashed through his mind. Sure enough, he found the right place. Because this explosion wasn't spiritual power or demon power. He smelled a familiar yet strange smell amidst the roar and smoke. In his previous world, the smell of firecrackers being set off during the New Year's festival. This was a man-made explosion. Man-made, not man-made. If it was any other time, under any other circumstances, Li Yunxin would definitely be able to save Lord Wolf. But this explosion today shocked him. When he was in the city of Wei, he taught someone the black powder technique. That person received the formula of the black powder like it was a treasure, and even the Yu family valued it very much. This meant that this thing hadn't appeared in this world yet. But the explosion in the valley today, the power was far from what the black powder could achieve. It should be some kind of better explosive, so good that even Li Yunxin didn't know what it was. And because of this shock, Lord Wolf's life was lost. When the smoke slightly dispersed and the loud noise gradually subsided, Lord Wolf's body fell back to the ground, into 3 pieces. His face was unrecognizable and his vitality was cut off. At this time, Li Yunxin finally reacted. He shook the iron chain in his hand and was about to capture Lord Wolf's soul. But he didn't know if it was because of the energy from the explosion, the shockwave, or something else that affected the soul. That demon's soul was no longer in the valley. He didn't know where it was blown to. Now he looked to his side. He saw that Lu Gongzan was also dumbfounded. Actually, Lord Wolf was one of the most likable demons. He didn't eat humans but cooked food and wanted to be a mountain god. He even took off his clothes before the battle, probably because he couldn't bear to part with the silk robe. The 2 of them came to the valley full of confidence. They thought that they were the ones who had the power to decide life and death in this cave. If they didn't die, no one would be able to do anything. That was why they calmly watched Lord Wolf create trouble, not in a hurry. Now that they had a clue, they should have restrained him with a smile and then interrogated him in detail. If there was an opportunity and this Lord Wolf was tactful, maybe he could make him a demon general. Who would have thought that the current situation, what seemed like a comedy story, suddenly turned into a murder mystery? It was as if the day had suddenly turned into a dark night. Lu Gongzan didn't expect this turn of events, and the little demons were even more at a loss. If they didn't go out to chase after the old ghost, they would probably be dead as well. Finally, when all the dirt and stones fell from the sky like raindrops, Lu Laodao looked at Li Yunxin. Brother Exen, Li Yunxin shook his body and the dirt on his shoulders rolled off. He glanced at Lord Wolf's corpse, walked to the side of the leader in black who was thrown to the side by Lu Gongzan, picked him up and stared at him. "What the hell are you doing?" At this time the little demon was also stunned. Like a corpse, he was shaken by Li Yunxin twice and then he suddenly screamed, "Kill that old thing! Avenge the king!" When he shouted this sentence, his hatred was about to burst, and he didn't care about Li Yunxin's even more terrifying expression. But after this shout he started to cry again. It's all because of you two jinxes, scourges. You killed my king. I killed my king. Kill that old thing. My king treated you well, how dare you? This time no one listened to him. The rest of the little demons were trembling in fear, and they didn't have the mood to kill that old thing. Looking at the leader's appearance, maybe he had a secret in the past. He was secretly on good terms with the old ghost. Now, although he didn't know what the old ghost had done to anger his king, he was actually hot-blooded and wanted to let him go. But now he found out that his king was dead, and he realized that the old ghost he wanted to protect was different from him, and he regretted it very much. Li Yunxin stared at him for a while and then threw him to the ground. Then he turned to stare at the old ghost. Watch him for me. He said this coldly to Lu Gongzan, and then paced 2 steps in exasperation, muttering to himself, such a good thing, such a good thing. Really? Saying this, he glared at the old ghost. He looked like he couldn't wait to kill him right here and now. However, because the other party was indeed an important person, he couldn't do it. Lu Gongzan didn't say anything. But his expression was also very ugly. He strode over and placed several restrictions on the old ghost's body and then said, Brother Exen, what about these? Li Yunxin waved his hand angrily. What's the use of keeping these idiots? Get lost. It was unclear whether this get lost was directed at Lu Gongzan or the little demons. Lu Gongzan tacitly agreed that it was the latter. He didn't ask anymore, and with a livid face he took back the talisman on one of the little demons. He also said in a deep voice, Get lost. At this moment the 4 demon soldiers seemed to wake up from a dream. Although they still didn't know what happened since their king was already dead, how could they dare to stay here? They immediately ran away in fear. Li Yunxin turned around and found that the leader in black was still on the ground. It took him a long time to get up, standing shakily, looking at the corpse of the wolf lord on the ground. His face unexpectedly had a sorrowful expression like a human. He frowned. Get lost. The leader paused, suddenly knelt on the ground, kowtowed 3 times to the corpse of the wolf lord and also ran away. And so, after a dozen breaths, in this valley there were only Li Yunxin, Lu Gongzan and the old ghost. Lao Dao stood beside the old ghost, watching Li Yunxin with his hands behind his back, staring blankly in the direction of the valley entrance. For a quarter of an hour he didn't say a word. As if it was the first time he suffered such a blow, so he lost his composure. Lao Dao thought for a while, finally sighed and said in a low voice, Brother X and I. Only then did Li Yunxin turn his face. As soon as Lu Gongzan saw his appearance he was stunned. Because Li Yunxin's face now didn't have an angry or frustrated expression. On the contrary, there was a smile. This smile he saw when Li Yunxin planned to deal with the city of Wei prefectural magistrate Li Yaoxi, and also when he dealt with Yunzi. It was a kind of complacent, slightly evil smile. Lu Gongzan's heart suddenly fell into his stomach and he suddenly felt light. He blinked. Brother Exen? Li Yunxin tilted his head. Let's go. Go catch fish. Lao Dao was stunned again. Then he looked at the old ghost beside him. Then this. It's also a scarecrow. Li Yunxin snorted. If I hadn't done this kind of thing before, I would have almost been fooled. Walking in the mountains at night was a very dangerous thing. Many things that were insignificant during the day could be fatal. For example, a stone could make people fall off a cliff. A sharp branch could also poke people's eyes. But these problems didn't exist for Li Yunxin and Lu Gongzan. The 2 of them exited Lord Wolf's cave, and in the time it took to say 3 or 4 sentences, they had already walked the path that the person they were looking for had taken nearly a quarter of an hour to complete. They walked to a small Colonel. Li Yunxin casually chopped a bush in front of him and sighed, You now remind me of my past. If a demon were to casually throw them away they would fall to the ground and be heavily injured. So how did you survive all these years with the fiendish demons? The person who heard his words was now sitting against an old tree. His breathing was rapid and his brows were tightly knitted. It seemed that he had indeed suffered serious internal injuries. Chapter 579. Lu Gongzan rubbed his fingers behind Li Yunxin's back. A soft light shone on the face of the black-clothed leader in the cave. At this time, looking at his face, he finally felt that it was not so ordinary. His face was pale, but his expression became lively. He was no longer dull. His eyes looked especially black in the light. He covered his chest with one hand and supported himself on the ground with the other. White air was coming out of his mouth and his chest was making ho-ho sounds. Maybe some bone was broken. He looked at Li Yunxin and Lu Gongzan without saying anything. The three pairs of eyes looked at each other for a while. Li Yunxin said, "When I let you go, you went back to the other courtyard first. You dug out some gold and silver, 2 sets of clothes and some ointment for bruises. Then you left. I can see these things with talismans. You must be a human to be able to use these things. What I saw in the demon-revealing mirror wasn't your soul but your real body. Am I right?" The black-clothed leader still didn't say anything. But in the end he slowly put his hand into his robe and took out some gold and silver. He threw them on the ground. The gold and silver disappeared into the snow. "I only have this much money on me," he said. Listening to him now, he was a completely different person. Before, when he was disguised as a demon, he purposely raised his voice, which sounded sharp and stupid. Now his voice was low and calm, which was pleasant to the ear. His face also had some contours because of the firelight. Li Yunxin frowned and looked at him carefully. He felt that he could be the main character with this appearance. Although he wasn't good-looking, he wasn't ugly either. Li Yunxin smiled. "You and I both know that I didn't look for you for gold and silver." The man coughed twice in a low voice. The blood splattered on the white snow like falling petals in spring. "Then why? I'm just a pitiful person who took refuge in the Wolf Lord's cave. If you want to seek revenge, look for him, not me." Li Yunxin was silent. It was a stalemate. Both he and the black-clothed man knew something. He knew that the black-clothed man might be the real crown prince. Since he was the real crown prince, he knew many things that he didn't know. Perhaps he knew as much as Grandpa D. He wanted to get some information from the man in black, so he had to pretend to be the guide. However, the problem was that he had learned his lesson from his confrontation with Grandpa D on Yunshan Mountain. He did not dare to open his mouth and ask any more questions. For example, if he casually asked, "How long have you been waiting here?" What if the real guide knew when the real prince would arrive? He could only avoid the important and dwell on the trivial. He carefully played around the edges and asked this person to reveal some useful information. However, this person wasn't stupid. He hid in Lord Wolf's cave and became the leader of the demons in his human form. It was also as if he was trying to brainwash Lord Wolf, making him believe that he was the one and saying all sorts of nonsense as a secret signal. Therefore, once someone like Li Yunxin came looking for him, his attention would be drawn to Lord Wolf. And this person was watching in the dark. Previously, when Li Yunxin and Lu Gongzan were led to the courtyard to rest, this black-clothed man and the other 2 demons stood straight at the door. They were watching him and Lu Gongzan. This guy was cautious but bold. When Lord Wolf realized that something was wrong and was about to give him up, he activated the trap that he had set up earlier and killed Lord Wolf without saying anything. He acted out another bitter drama. When Li Yunxin asked him to leave, he did the finishing work calmly. He kowtowed to the remains of Lord Wolf. If it was someone else, they wouldn't have thought that the person they were looking for was swaggering in front of them and standing up for them everywhere. Fortunately, Li Yunxin often did this kind of thing. When he first met the Lord Dongting in the Purple Myrtle Palace of the Lord Dongting Mountain, didn't he use this kind of method to frame the cultivator of the Xianmen sect? When 2 drama queens competed, the winner or loser depended on the details. This person's mind might not lose to Li Yunxin's, but the disadvantage was that he didn't have a magical power. Some things required a smart ordinary person to reason, investigate and speculate to get a rough conclusion. But for people like Li Yunxin, just like what he did after he left and where he was now, he only needed a magical power to know. Let's say something fair. This guy was acting a little too hard. Maybe it was because they hadn't seen each other for a long time and were unfamiliar with each other. But at this moment, this person must also know that Li Yunxin knew something about him. However, since he had made Lord Wolf a target, it meant that he knew that there might be danger lurking in the shadows. Now that Li Yunxin and Lu Gongzan showed up, he should find out whether they were guides or dangerous people. Now that he was seriously injured, he still pretended to be confused. Just like Li Yunxin, he didn't talk about the main point. He was also waiting for the other party to provide useful information first. After a moment of silence, Li Yunxin put his hand into his pocket, took out a jade bottle and threw it on the man's leg. "Eat this first. I suspect that your rib fracture caused pulmonary edema." He looked at the man in black and said the words, "pulmonary edema," softly but clearly. "But you also know that I couldn't do anything at that time." After saying this, he raised a finger and pointed it to the sky. In fact, he was risking it again by uttering a word which he considered to be of no consequence, and which did not exist in this world, and by making an ambiguous suggestion. But this couldn't be helped. He couldn't observe slowly and make a long-term plan. In this situation of information asymmetry, the longer he delayed, the easier it was to give himself away. The wisest thing to do was to take a risk and quickly find an entry point. Then he would get enough information before the other party noticed that something was wrong, and he would have more opportunities to explain perfunctorily. If he succeeded, he could slowly pry the other party's mouth open. If he failed, he had to kill him immediately without hesitation. However, the other party should have thought of this possibility. The man in black was stunned. According to Li Yunxin's sharp eyes, this expression was natural. But even so, there were many explanations. For example, I didn't expect that I would save him, or, I didn't expect that I was not the guide. Then he silently picked up the jade bottle and opened the lid. Without hesitation, without even smelling it, he directly poured the contents of the bottle into his mouth and swallowed it naturally. After 2 breaths, the effect of the medicine was immediate. Vitality reappeared in his body. He was a little surprised and straightened his body, no longer feeling any pain. So he slowly stood up and looked at Li Yunxin. Finally, he said, "What happened?" When he said this, he raised his hand and pointed to the sky just like Li Yunxin. There were 2 possibilities. One was that Li Yunxin asked a stupid question that he shouldn't have asked. He noticed something was wrong, but his expression didn't change. He tried to make Li Yunxin say more stupid things to confirm his speculation. The second possibility was that Li Yunxin's bet was right. The people from Munanju and Black Bayanjun were all paying close attention to him, treating him as the person in front of them. The Freemasons' elders in the Heavenly Cloud Mountain also knew about this. But Munanju and the Freemasons were opposing forces. This meant that this person must belong to one side. Based on the various details he knew so far, the possibility of him belonging to Munanju was higher. Then he could understand that pointing to the sky meant that the Freemasons were paying attention to them. But he still couldn't be completely sure. Now everything was in a chain of suspicion. Every sentence could have an opposite interpretation. The best result was to carefully sum up the details from each other's truth or lies, and then use these details to piece together the facts closest to the truth. Li Yunxin planned to probe like this for at least 1 night. If he still couldn't get any useful information after 1 night and he still couldn't control this person, he was a mortal after all. With the demon's divine abilities and the professional skills from Li Yunxin's previous life, he should be able to easily get what was in his head. But that way this person would have to die. If he spared his life, he might be able to dig out more things this person didn't even know about in the future. When he asked what happened, Li Yunxin decided to take another risk. He would use the great calamity that Grandmaster D had mentioned to send him away. But just as he was about to speak, the man in black exhaled softly and said, "Is your relationship so tense now? Looks like I was right to be more careful. Was the thunderstorm coming for me?" This time it was Li Yunxin's turn to be dumbfounded. He had thought about what he would do if he were in the same situation as the man in black. He would pretend to trust him and then lead him to reveal more information. But now this person in front of him had said 3 sentences in a row, and all of them contained very clear information. Is your relationship so tense now? This meant that Li Yunxin's speculation was right. They were indeed 2 hostile forces. However, it seemed that there wasn't much hatred between them in the past, so he used the word, now. The information revealed by this sentence was exactly the same as what Li Yunxin had observed. Although the Freemasonry and Munanju coexisted, they didn't fight as fiercely as Daotong and the demons. There was a covert, limited, low-intensity war going on between them. It was said that Black Bayanjun of Sanluo Temple used to be a celestial, or had a deep relationship with a celestial. Now the 2 Yama kings had a deep relationship with Munanju. This also confirmed what the man in black had said. Munanju and the Freemasonry had some kind of close relationship in the past. Looks like I was right to be more careful. The thunderstorm coming for me meant that he was prepared for the deterioration of their relationship. That was why he hid and did not dare to wander around in this world. In the past, Li Yunxin was like a child who walked into a dark forest full of ferocious beasts. He didn't know how dangerous it was until he experienced many life and death situations later on. Now he slowly realized how lucky he was to survive. But this person knew the dangers of the forest from the beginning, so he hid for so long and so deep. These 3 sentences did not seem to be a test. It seemed that after Li Yunxin threw him the jade bottle and cured his injury, he had won this person's trust. This was the strange thing. What was it that won this guy's trust in that instant? Or could it be that the danger in his eyes and the threat from the sky were different from what Li Yunxin thought? In that case, Li Yunxin exhaled lightly and said a few bolder words. So you should have heard about the little demon protection. Then he looked at him seriously. But don't rush. First tell me, how did you live in the past? Also, what should I call you now? He paused for a moment. You should know that before we mistook that person for you. The information conveyed by the man in black aroused Li Yunxin's irrepressible curiosity. He decided to take the risk again. Perhaps it was not a rational approach, but there was no better way. A strange light appeared in the man in black's eyes. How? Li Yunxin shook his head calmly. Things are complicated. Otherwise, I wouldn't have found you only now. The man in black suddenly smiled. I understand. You are suspecting that I am also an imposter. But it is understandable. Li Yunxin's heart skipped a beat. Understandable? What does it mean? Does it mean that this kind of situation is really possible? But then the man in black looked around. Then let's talk here. Here, Sai, build another fire. It is very similar to that side. That side. Li Yunxin repeated this word in his heart and casually flicked the ground. A ball of flame appeared out of thin air and started burning on the snowy ground. The snow was quickly burned, revealing the weeds underneath. Li Yunxin said, This is boring. Old Lu, please go and collect some firewood, it is more interesting. The two had only exchanged a few words before, in fact the time was very short. During this time Lu Gongzan kept a straight face, not letting any emotion show on his face. Now that he heard Brother Xin ask him to collect firewood, he realized that if he stayed any longer he might ruin the plan. Perhaps there would be a fierce confrontation. If he was surprised or frightened, it might ruin the plan. Therefore he responded in a low voice without changing his expression, turned around and disappeared into the forest. In this small valley only Li Yunxin and the man in black were left. The two stood around a flame floating in the air. Their faces were gloomy because of the fire. If a mortal passed by and saw this scene he would definitely be scared sick. After the time of 3 breaths, when the sound of Lu Gongzan's footsteps disappeared in the distance, the man in black said, Here, call me Xianxia. Li Yunxin nodded. Okay, Xianxia. Please speak. Xianxia narrowed his eyes and looked at Li Yunxin for a while, then said, Say something you can understand first. Because of this sentence, Li Yunxin was stunned again. Then he realized that things had gone wrong. This man who called himself Xianxia did not fully trust him. Or rather, he did not successfully play the role he wanted to be. Li Yunxin wanted Xianxia to think that he was a guide who understood everything. But after a few words just now, the other party realized that he was not. But because of some other reasons, perhaps he saw him as an envoy. Perhaps a role like the Freemasonry Wandering Souls. He knew some things but not the core content. That was why he said, Say something you can understand first. Li Yunxin suddenly understood Xianxia's current attitude. It was probably the same as when he first came to this world. Cautious, but also with a certain sense of superiority. Because in his eyes, even the emperor was nothing more than an ignorant and backward fellow. But he did not feel disappointed. Instead he felt a little relieved. In the end he had achieved what he wanted before. He had hidden himself in a certain way to gain the other party's trust and obtain more information. Even if this trust was limited and temporary. Speaking of which, I was unlucky. When I came, the village was hit by a beast disaster. Xianxia sat back in his previous position and slowly spoke. As he spoke, he looked at Li Yunxin as if he was also studying his expression. My village is actually not far from your village. 3 days' journey. It was early spring that year. The wolves had no food to eat, so they came to the village to eat people. The small village, a dozen families, almost all died. The father and mother of the original owner of my body also died at that time. At that time he was about 3 or 4 years old. Li Yunxin blinked her eyes. He knew about this. Xianxia said that they were attacked by the wolves. Li Chunfeng once told him that in the year he was born, a village 3 days' journey away from his village was hit by a wolf disaster. At that time he and Sheng Guanyu planned to settle there. But when they got there they only saw corpses all over the ground, so they went elsewhere. Then they arrived at the place where they later lived in seclusion. This meant that this Xiexing was actually 4 years older than he was. And he had possessed the body of a native of this world. Li Yunxin thought for a moment and said, No wonder, we couldn't find you. Xiexing smiled again. But the original owner of this body was taken back by a female wolf. It's very strange. Most of the legendary wolf children were still in their infancy. It's very rare for a 3 or 4-year-old child to be adopted by a wolf pack. And then I survived. I won't go into details about what happened in between. Probably because I didn't understand the situation around me. I tried to go out several times. But I couldn't. My body was too weak and I was malnourished since childhood. I didn't dare to get sick or get hurt. You should understand. Li Yunxin nodded. Of course he understood. He transmigrated into the body of a child from a poor mountain family, and his body was thin and weak since childhood. Then he was trapped in the deep mountains and could only rely on the wolf for survival. He could die from a cold, a cut on his leg, a parasitic infection, and being targeted by a large beast could also die. Not to mention getting out of the mountains and finding people. Just the fact that he actually survived was already the template of a legendary protagonist. Another year later I met a monster. This is the first time I saw such a thing. Xiexing shook his head and sighed. It's really different here. It's really different here. Li Yunxin remembered this sentence. Did it mean that he had lived here in this world before? Or that someone he knew had lived here before? The tone of this sentence was like a person from a big city returning to his hometown in the countryside. There was a strange sense of mystery. Chapter 580. When he paused, Li Yunxin said softly, Was the monster you met Lord Wolf? Lord Wolf. Oh. Xiexing didn't look at Li Yunxin but looked at the flame, but it was also a wolf demon. It was a wolf demon that had just become a demon. It was temperamental. He found me in the mountain and brought me back for fun. After torturing me, he threw me aside and soon forgot about me. He paused and straightened his body, pointing at the cave of Lord Wolf. At that time the wolf demon's lair was on the mountain, above the valley. Look at that mountain. Li Yunxin looked in the direction he pointed. Although the moonlight tonight was not good, the view was clear because of the snow on the mountain. So he saw the mountain next to Lord Wolf's cave. It was very high and steep. It was covered by lush vegetation like a fairyland. There were many mountains like this here. Layers of mountains separated this place from the bustling city of Wei Little Rock Canyon and the capital. It was like two completely different worlds. I was thrown on the cliff halfway up the mountain. There was only a small path, but it had to pass through the demon's lair. Originally he said that he wanted to use it as a prison, but he forgot about it after throwing me in. After that he recruited a few demons that had just become human. They didn't have any skills but they were strong. They called each other brothers and said that they were the 12 cave masters. When Xiexing said this his expression was very calm and his eyes were very focused. Li Yunxin was looking at his expression, and he was also looking at Li Yunxin's expression. Both of them had a tacit understanding. They both knew that these words might be false but neither of them said it. For the two schemers, any kind of open and honest action would seem childish. At least at this moment they were like two skilled gladiators, holding a sword and a shield, carefully circling and testing each other. No one would really fight. He didn't know what Xiexing was thinking. But Li Yunxin enjoyed this feeling, this thrilling thrill of having everything under control. But who didn't? I stayed there for a whole month. Without water they could only lick the dew on the stone walls and drink the rainwater. If there's nothing to eat we'll eat the wild fruits on the cliff first. If we're lucky we'll be able to catch some small beasts. But even so after a month they'll be on the verge of death. Li Yunxin frowned. Why don't you go out? Xiexing laughed. Go out? The wolf demon had forgotten about me. I used to try to cross that path at night thinking of going outside. In the end he discovered that there were already more than 10 demons gathered in the lair, and they did not leave day and night. I have also seen them eat human flesh and say that they are not full. They had indeed left me there. If I go out from there I'll probably be eaten halfway. Li Yunxin frowned. It's indeed difficult. Then what will you do? Regardless of Li Yunxin's position and identity, It was undeniable that it was hard to dislike a person with such a pleasing appearance and ability to read people's minds when he intentionally did so. And now, even if he was willing to cooperate, no matter how vigilant and picky Xianxia was, he had to admit that he was a very good listener. Xianxia listened to his words and smiled again. Then I had a fortuitous encounter. Li Yunxin's eyes widened and he asked at the right time, "What fortuitous encounter?" He knew Xianxia's state. Xianxia. No matter where he came from, he was now a human. Since he was a human, his physiological structure determined his emotions and preferences, roughly within a certain range. For example, no matter how sloppy a normal person was, they would not like to eat shit. This meant that even if Xianxia was scheming and sinister, there was a range to follow. Even if it was Li Yunxin himself, a monster without emotions in his previous life. In this life he had a normal body. Didn't his emotions and will gradually change? Matter and will could never be discussed separately. Therefore certain emotions were inevitable. For example, coming to a strange world alone. Going through many trials and tribulations. Even through all kinds of fortuitous encounters, he fought for a space for himself. And when he did these things, no one knew and there was no one like him to talk to. Now that he finally met a decent person, the desire to talk was inevitable. Xianxia might be extremely cautious. But in his previous life, Li Yunxin had met people who were more difficult to deal with. Therefore Xianxia spoke a little more. Even he himself did not realize it. I was on the verge of death at that time. I knew that if I stayed here there would be no change. No one would come to save me in a short time and I might starve to death. So I drank all the water I had saved, ate some food and decided to climb down the cliff. Li Yunxin nodded. In fact, he should have done this long ago. However, Xianxia knew that he still had people like him in this world and seemed to know that someone would come to find him. Therefore, his will was not as firm as a real desperate survivor. And the result? The result was naturally falling down. Xianxia sighed softly. Li Yunxin also breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. The other party began to show some subtle emotions. Before it was a smile, now it was a sigh. Revealing emotions meant that the vigilance in the heart was gone. This was a good thing. But I was blocked by the trees on the cliff and didn't fall into the valley. Instead, I fell on a stone platform a dozen meters below the cliff. There used to be grass and trees on this stone platform, so I didn't see it. Even so, it was only a superficial wound. Then I found there was a stone cave behind the stone platform. Li Yunxin clapped his hands lightly. Wonderful. Inside the stone cave, there used to be someone living there. Xianxia's eyes shone slightly. It seemed that this matter had left a deep impression in his mind. Even now, when he thought about it, he still felt excited, even in this kind of situation. I found a stone bed inside. A chest. When I opened the chest, I found a martial arts manual. It was called the Killing Intent Formula. There was also a letter. It said that there was once a martial arts expert who came here to train in seclusion and practice this heart technique. After mastering the heart technique, an enemy came to find him. The enemy poisoned him, then crippled him and left him in the cave to die. Before he died, he wrote down his heart technique and his experience, leaving it to the fated person. And I became the fated person. When Xianxia said this, he seemed to be in a normal mood. But Li Yunxin was now a great demon, and his keen eyesight was incomparable to that of humans. Therefore he could clearly hear Xianxia's slightly accelerated heartbeat, see the slightest muscle twitch on his face, and even remember how long it took for him to gasp for breath. Therefore he knew that Xianxia was not as calm as he looked. This person was extremely excited at the moment. And it was far beyond the extent that he should be. It seemed that what excited him was not only the survival and the treasures left by the predecessors. There were other factors. For example, a certain film and television work in Li Yunxin's world. Androids built a real paradise. Real humans could play in this paradise. Everything they saw was real and fake at the same time. The experience brought by such a world was by no means comparable to any film, television, or game. Li Yunxin knew this feeling very well. In the eyes of a transmigrator, this world was a game world. Now in such a world he personally experienced the things in the story of the past. And it was extremely real, and it was indeed a matter of life and death. This kind of excitement was hard to imagine. Different from Li Yunxin. Xianxia seemed to know his mission and purpose clearly. And he was isolated from the world for a long time. Therefore, in a sense, although he lived in this world longer than Li Yunxin, in fact he had not fully integrated into this world. Li Yunxin realized that he had grasped a key point. Previously, he and Lu Gongzan showed amazing and incredible power in Lord Wolf's cave residence. But from beginning to end, Xianxia as a mortal did not feel fear or panic. He was calm and composed. Even if he was sitting opposite to Li Yunxin at the moment, he did not feel the slightest sense of awkwardness. This meant that he despised the power that Li Yunxin and Lu Gongzan had even if he didn't have it yet. Li Yunxin understood this feeling too well. In the past he also despised the power of the cultivators of Xianmen for the same reason and despised the power of the emperor in the secular world. This was almost the contempt of a member of a higher civilization for a lower civilization, just like a modern urbanite despising the chief of a primitive tribe. Arrogance was a good thing. Li Yunxin realized that he had found the entry point. So he let out a sigh of relief. And then I mastered it. It only took me 3 days. Xianxia shook his head slightly. But that person said he had been meditating for 10 years. The killing intent technique is indeed amazing. I mastered this thing. Although it can't be said that I have infinite strength, it's not a problem to fight a tiger with my bare hands. So I went down the cliff. Relying on my martial arts, I walked in all directions for more than 10 days. But I couldn't get out. This mountain area is too big. I don't know where I am now. Li Yunxin nodded. I can understand. I met that Lord Wolf. Xianxia was silent for a while as if he was quite emotional. That Lord Wolf and the 12 cave masters had a conflict. His cultivation was higher, so he destroyed their cultivation and beat them back to their original forms. I have martial arts. I lied and said that I was also a monster. Then Lord Wolf asked me if I was a ghost cultivator. Only then did I know there was such a thing. The cultivation of the monsters here is not high. After becoming a human, they just have a bit more strength. I relied on my martial arts to not reveal any flaws. Since I couldn't get out, it's not bad to temporarily rely on that Lord Wolf to have a place to stay. In the next few years I stayed in the cave with the monsters. Xianxia looked at Li Yunxin. Wait. Li Yunxin smiled. That Lord Wolf is really pitiful, but Xianxia snorted. Rotten wood can't be carved. But there is no other way. There are many monsters smarter than him, but most of them are very cruel. Only he as a monster is not too bad. I trained him for a few years and that's what you see now. I kept telling him that I saw the ruins of an ancient immortal. There was a prophecy saying that a certain monster would become the ruler of the world. Then I forged some things for him to see. He believed it. Li Yunxin thought for a while, wanting to say something but hesitated. Xianxia raised his eyebrows. Not only did his emotions become rich, even his expression became lively. In the cave, the things you saw him do, didn't I teach him? That's why I said it's rotten wood. I taught him to be low-key and endure and taught him to pay attention to details. The 2 words he said when he first met you were taught by me. I taught him for many years. He finally knows how to use them. But after that, the 3 visits to the thatched cottage. That was really stupid, it was all his own idea. He learned something from me, so he took it out and used it, but he couldn't use it well. Li Yunxin waved his hand. But why did you run away later? At that time did you think I was? The look on Xianxia's face suddenly disappeared. He calmed down again. After looking at Li Yunxin for a while he said, I also want to run away now. But I can't. At that time I didn't know who you were. But now, I still have doubts. Let me ask you a question. Even Li Yunxin, who had calmed down a lot at this moment, was still a little nervous after hearing this sentence. What he was most afraid of had come. The question from Xianxia's mouth must be extremely difficult. If he was not careful, the limited trust he had now would disappear. In that case he had to treat Xianxia as a disposable object, to seize his memory and then kill him. In fact, there were several ways to get the best of both worlds, to get the things in his mind and to make him be controlled by him. However, the most reassuring thing was a dead person. This matter was related to his life, so he must not be careless. Once Mu Nanju found this true crown prince, how would they deal with him who knew too much information? Li Yunxin did not want to think about such a situation. So he said in a low voice, ask. At the same time he spread out his perception. Once again he carefully checked every suspicious place to prevent himself from falling into Xianxia's trap like what happened in the valley. Xianxia thought for a while and said, this world's Little Demon Protection. Little Demon Protection Association. Is it one of us? Li Yunxin was stunned. Xiaxing keenly noticed his reaction. He smiled. Forget it. I will ask in another way. The master of the little demon protection. That way, River Lord, is he one of us? Li Yunxin was stunned for a while again. Then he said, it may be. Xiaxing narrowed his eyes. He carefully examined him. Finally he sighed. I guess is right. You don't know the core secret. In the little demon protection, you are considered a high-level peripheral figure, right? Li Yunxin finally regained his senses. He frowned slightly and said in a low voice, I know far more than you think. Xiaxing laughed softly, including the ascended. Li Yunxin's expression froze on her face again. Xiaxing seemed to have gotten the information he wanted and gradually lost interest. All right. Let's stop here. Now, do you have the Tao of this world? Chapter 581. Li Yunxin paused for a while. Then he frowned. What are you talking about? But his heart was already filled with joy. The first 2 times he was in a daze were sincere. Now this time he finally understood why Xiaxing would ask this question. Lord Wei River, who created the little demon protection, was a mystery to Xiaxing, who lived in the forest and had limited information. However, smart people would always be able to see the outline of the overall situation from limited information. As the saying goes, by seeing one spot one could know the whole picture. If Li Yunxin was in Xiaxing's position, the name Little Demon Protection would attract his attention first. Little Demon Protection Association. This was not a name that people in this world would come up with. And the leader of the Little Demon Protection, Lord Wei River, destroyed the forces of Daotong and demons at the same time. Its origin was also mysterious. To a transmigrator like Xiaxing, it was as if this thing was standing on the top of a mountain holding a torch and shouting to him, the organization is here, come find us. This smart person, with a very reasonable and brilliant deduction, regarded the Little Demon Protection as the organization he belonged to. He still didn't know about the existence of Mu Nanju. Li Yunxin's previous worries and painstakingly searched for an entry point. Now this smart person suddenly delivered himself to his door. So, smart people were really the most adorable creatures in this world. Especially those who thought themselves to be smart. Li Yunxin's previous reaction wasn't fake at all. Even he himself couldn't see any flaws. Seeing his current appearance, Xiaxing smiled again. I said Taoist arts. Since I can use 3 days to learn that killing intent incantation, Taoist arts should also be very fast. I couldn't find it before, now you should have it. Give it to me first so I can protect myself on the road. This was a brilliant plot. It was exactly the same as what Li Yunxin had done. If this Li Yunxin was one of us, of course he would gladly agree. If he wasn't one of us but wanted to gain his trust, he would be even more generous. Li Yunxin's reaction was also within his expectations. Are still immortal. Li Yunxin pretended to be hesitant. I naturally have Tao techniques and I can give them to you. But you have just recovered from a serious injury. Cultivating Tao techniques at this time. Something goes wrong. Xiaxing calmly said, when I was cultivating the killing intent arts, I didn't know anything compared to now. Do not judge me by the standards of your world. Give it to me. Li Yunxin sighed and put his hand into his sleeve. After searching for a while he took out a scroll. This is the golden light technique. It's a type of Kenzo sword technique. After saying these 2 sentences he didn't say anything else and directly threw the Taoist book to him. Li Yunxin had taken this along with the Cloud Mountain when she plundered it. The various techniques of Daotong and Kenzo, even if they were unimportant and low-level techniques, would always have a backup. Thus, Li Yunxin caught them all in one fell swoop. The scroll he threw to Xiaxing was actually not a third-rate one. When the people of the 5-gene sword sect built their foundations and reached the emptiness realm, they would first cultivate this scroll. Now it was like throwing a junior high textbook to a child who just graduated from kindergarten. It just depended on whether his abilities were as great as his arrogance. Xiaxing took it. He didn't put it away. Instead he immediately opened it and looked at it with the light of the fire. It seemed that he had already wasted too much time in this mountain, so he didn't want to waste any time from now on. Thus, in this completely silent mountain, Xiaxing read for almost an hour. This was a very long time. But it was bearable for the 2. During this time, Xiaxing was silent most of the time. Occasionally he would ask Li Yunxin a few questions. He was a little surprised by these questions. Because the questions were all critical, and the questions were even more profound than what Li Yunxin had imagined. This meant that Xianxia had an amazing understanding of Dao techniques. It was even possible that he was even better than Li Yunxin. This made him feel uncomfortable. How could such a person exist? He didn't believe it. But in the end, Xianxia put down the scroll. He closed his eyes, sat cross-legged on the ground, and adjusted his breathing for a while as if he was comprehending. Then he picked up the scroll and read it again as if he was trying to verify a few key points. About a quarter of an hour later, he raised his hand and threw the scroll into the fire. Li Yunxin frowned. He saw that Xianxia had already entered meditation. Then, he began to feel a slight fluctuation. The surrounding spiritual energy began to gather in Xianxia's body. This time he was really shocked and he almost jumped up. A warrior. He had never come into contact with Dao techniques. After reading the Dao scripture for more than an hour, he entered meditation and he even sensed this world. If Li Yunxin hadn't disturbed the spiritual energy in the world, causing the spiritual energy in this place to become chaotic and thin, this Xianxia would have successfully built his foundation and stepped into the intent realm tonight. This was really King strange. How could there be such a person? It only took him half an hour more than when he successfully built his foundation and stepped into the intent realm. But the spiritual energy in this place couldn't be compared to before. In the past, the spiritual energy in this world was like a calm ocean. As long as one had the tools, the right cultivation method, they could obtain water from this ocean. But now the ocean had become turbulent. Although one could absorb some spiritual energy, the spiritual energy conflicted with each other, and it wasn't as easy to obtain as before. Xianxia's body sensed the world. But if one were to describe it vividly, it would be like the messy spiritual energy was rushing into his body, entangling with each other and blocking his way, making it impossible for anyone to enter. If he wanted to truly build his foundation and step into the cultivation world, he had to find a paradise with the same stable spiritual energy as before. About a quarter of an hour later, Xianxia exclaimed softly and opened his eyes. Li Yunxin immediately retracted the gloating smile on his face and solemnly frowned. You can't be impatient about this. Spending 15 minutes in meditation is already an extraordinary achievement. There are very few people in this world who can compare to you. Xianxia thought for a while. Very few people. Is there anyone who's faster than me? Yes. Li Yunxin smiled. I heard that there's a mysterious peerless master who entered meditation half an hour faster than you during his first time. But it'll be a blessing if I can meet someone like that. Xianxia also smiled. That's impossible. It's just a legend. Li Yunxin gave a non-committal, oh. He found this guy more and more annoying because he was too like himself. Xianxia stood up, brushed the snow off his body and said casually, let's go. Take me to Qinzhao. Hearing this, Li Yunxin was silent for a while. Then he said calmly, you won't be able to see him. After saying this he paused. But Xianxia only frowned slightly and didn't reply. So he said the second half of the sentence, Qin Zhao is already dead. Xianxia's face was filled with undisguised shock. Even though it was only for a short moment. Then the destined one looked at Li Yunxin suspiciously. Are you kidding me? Isn't she already a few thousand years old? Li Yunxin's mind raced. Xianxia clearly knew Qin Zhao. The phrase has lived for thousands of years, revealed two pieces of information. First, since it was already, it meant that Qin Zhao hadn't existed in the past. Qin Zhao was indeed a transmigrator. Therefore, the vague information about her cultivation and attainment of Taoism became more credible. She used to be a mortal. Second, before Xianxia came here, or for some purpose received some information or used some method, it was no earlier than 2,000 years ago. If it was earlier he wouldn't know that Qin Zhao had attained enlightenment and had a long lifespan. But it wouldn't be later than 1,000 years ago. Because at that time, the art saint had already been killed by the saints. Xianxia really didn't know anything else. This meant that it had been about 1,000 years since he received the information and came here. Then, Li Yunxin realized an unbelievable situation. The people of Southern Wood House, the art saint's remnant, thought he was the true prince. It was clear that everything was going according to plan on their end. Otherwise, they wouldn't have found someone after 1,000 years and thought they had found the right person at the beginning. To Xianxia he was 1,000 years late. No matter how he got the news that he was coming to this world, Art Saint Xianxia wasn't dead yet. This meant that the flow of time wasn't equal. Li Yunxin didn't know what this meant. However, he felt that this point must be extremely important, and it brought him a great shock. Thus, when Xiexing asked him, "How did Qin Zhao die?" he subconsciously answered, "He was killed by the other two saints of Cloud Mountain." Xiexing sighed and didn't say anything else. He seemed to have suffered a huge blow. A little while passed, each with his own thoughts, and at last the moon peeped out. Xiexing said, "So who's in charge now? I want to see that person." Li Yunxin said in a low voice, "We're in a bad situation right now." He paused. Originally, as the high-level member who wasn't a core member of the Demon Protection Group, he should have felt regret when he said this. But there was an unconcealable smugness on his face. It was as if he wasn't a member of the Demon Protection Group. "They've been suppressing us a lot. You made the right decision to hide here. If you didn't hold back and showed yourself outside, you probably wouldn't be standing here safely now. Their spies are everywhere outside." Li Yunxin spoke to Xiexing with the firelight. His voice was low and rhythmic. "When we walk outside, even with me around, it's best to be careful. Anyone can be their spy. Otherwise, they wouldn't be relying on the demons now." Xiexing frowned slightly. He seemed to be a little confused and a little lost. Li Yunxin started to show his unknown ability. But he had no choice. When he first met Xiexing, he wanted to get some key information from him. So he was careful and didn't give himself away, planning to gain Xiexing's trust. But he gradually realized that Xiexing was also a ruthless and vigilant person. So he settled for the next best thing, which was to gain a limited trust. He succeeded. Xiexing mistook him as a high-level member of the Demon Protection Group who didn't know too many core secrets. By now, Xiexing's vigilance had slowly weakened. Even his tone and expression became lively. But he still didn't dare to act rashly. He had met some people in his previous life. Maybe they didn't have his ability, but their anti-detection and anti-hypnosis abilities were extremely strong. From the information he obtained from the conversation with Xiexing, he realized that Xiexing had a very strong purpose for coming here. And he was a rational, cautious, and cold person. He wasn't a good person in the past. He was more like a professional fighter. This kind of person was very likely to be a ruthless person who couldn't be moved. So he still didn't move. Until he said what he just said. When talking about Qin Zhao, he casually said, "He was killed by the saints." This sentence seemed to have hit a minefield. Li Yunxin keenly noticed that Xiexing's expression had changed for a moment. He was suspicious again. And this time his suspicions were strong and turbulent. It might even overturn Xiexing's previous judgment of Li Yunxin's identity. At this point, the bad news was that his trust in Li Yunxin was almost gone. The good news was, it might be hard to imagine, but his vigilance was even lower. This was a little trick that Li Yunxin often played with people in the past. But now Xiexing had trapped himself in it. At first he didn't trust him and was extremely vigilant. He automatically set Li Yunxin as an enemy. Then he gave him a limited trust, still trying to find any clues to confirm his guess. Was this Li Yunxin an enemy or a friend? At this point his emotional inclination was no longer neutral. He was more inclined to find evidence to prove that he was an enemy and not a friend. So, Li Yunxin accidentally gave him the evidence. The idea that he was an enemy and not a friend eventually overwhelmed everything. At this point, when a person's certain thoughts and inclinations were too strong, objectivity would also abandon him. He started to accept some things more easily, but it was harder to accept others. For example, now, if Li Yunxin had said something like, "The outside world is very dangerous and the enemy is very powerful," when they first met, Xiexing would most likely be suspicious. At this point it would be extremely easy for him to accept such words. This was because his rationality and emotions were almost all focused on the matter of the enemy at this moment. Li Yunxin wanted him to believe this. To believe that the outside world was full of danger and that he shouldn't trust anyone, and strengthen this belief. Because, since he had already lost his trust, then he would use him to do something else. Xiexing was not the only person he was looking for on this trip. After saying this, Li Yunxin fell silent. Xiexing's confusion meant that his hint had some effect. But he didn't dare to be too hasty. Things had to be done slowly. To deal with this Xiexing, he had to be more cautious than dealing with anyone else. After a short period of silence, he said, so it will be very difficult for you to meet the manager. We have to think about this matter at length. I'll take you to the north first. He seemed to think a little hard, then said, a safe house. Xianxia nodded, okay. Then let's rest for the night. After saying this, he hit the ground with his palm. The snow was immediately pushed away by the wind from his palm, revealing the withered grass underneath. It seemed that the killing intent formula he practiced was indeed a good thing. In the world of mortals, it should be a kind of divine skill. No wonder he could rely on this skill to mix with the demons. Then Xianxia lay down on the weeds and pretended to rest. But as soon as his arm touched the ground, he made a soft hiss sound. Li Yunxin immediately asked with concern, "What's wrong?" Xianxia frowned and slowly lay down, then let out a long breath. "My injury hasn't healed yet. Do you still have the healing thing you gave me before?" Li Yunxin smiled. "It's not really a good thing." "Of course I do." He took out a bottle from his sleeve and threw it to him. Xianxia took it and drank it without hesitation. Then he held the jade bottle in his hand and let out a long breath. Slowly he fell asleep. His breathing quickly became long and slow, just like a person who had truly fallen asleep. But Li Yunxin knew that he wasn't sleeping. He was meditating again. Before he obtained the Dao technique, he drank the thing Li Yunxin gave him, so he must have experienced a different feeling. Because the martial arts and inner strength in Jianghu were actually imitations of cultivation methods by mortals. It could be considered as a kindergarten version of cultivation methods. As a powerful martial artist, of course he had experienced it. After comprehending the Dao technique, he should have realized that the thing he drank before was very beneficial to cultivation. So he found an excuse to get another bottle from Li Yunxin. Now that he drank it, he wouldn't waste any time. He used 3 breaths to meditate and began to absorb the spiritual power in the medicine into his body, intending to officially step into the door of cultivation. Xianxia was indeed very courageous and capable in doing things. If it wasn't for his identity, Li Yunxin actually felt that this person could become one of his most capable arms. Then quietly and softly he walked away. After walking for about a dozen steps, the shadows of the trees blocked the light. He could only see the red light between the trees. At this distance, ordinary people wouldn't be able to hear the quiet whispers. But Li Yunxin knew that this Xianxia could. He could sense that Xianxia's martial arts cultivation was roughly the same as Ying Juren's, or maybe even higher. According to Ying Juren's classification of martial artists in Jianghu, he should be a top second-rate master. If he used his inner strength, he should be able to hear the voices of people here. At least Ying Juren could. Li Yunxin said in a low voice, "Old Lu." Lu Gongzan quickly appeared from the shadows. His eyebrows and beard were covered in snow. Who knew what he was doing? "Let's go," Li Yunxin said. "He just tricked me into giving him the medicine, so he's regulating his breathing. Let's take advantage of this time to go back. Let's see if we can find anything else." Lu Gongzan frowned. "I'll stay here and watch him." Li Yunxin shook his head. "No need. The cave is 2 miles away from here. I can sense any movement within 3 miles. I'll know when he wakes up. He hasn't suspected us yet. Let's go." When he said this, he blinked his eyes hard. Lu Gongzan understood. "Oh, let's go and come back quickly." Chapter 582. So the two of them disappeared into the forest. But Xianxia was still lying motionlessly on the grass with his eyes closed. After a quarter of an hour, he slowly exhaled and opened his eyes. This breath was like a sharp arrow that became a white line in the cold night. He succeeded in building his foundation. He had already crossed the threshold between a mortal and a cultivator. But he still didn't get up. He was experiencing the feeling of the spiritual energy in his body and understanding the other things in the golden light technique. He was practicing Dharma, and those things were techniques. The golden light escape technique. If a mortal without any foundation came to practice this technique, it would probably take a long time. No matter how talented a person is, when faced with something completely unfamiliar, he or Li Yunxin was no exception. But the killing intent technique he practiced before could barely be considered as having a foundation. The spiritual energy of Dharma needed to circulate, and so did the internal energy of Shengong. But now that he had successfully built his foundation, his body was still slowly forming a snow mountain and qi. Every trace of spiritual energy in the medicinal liquid that was poured into his mouth was used to reconstruct and refine his body. And he wasn't unfamiliar with this process. Martial artists also practiced martial arts like this. Therefore, when comprehending techniques, it was like practicing martial arts and then comprehending fist techniques or saber techniques. There was always a common principle. So after another quarter of an hour, Xianxia thought that he could already use the golden light escape technique. So he decided to escape. That self-proclaimed. Xianxia was stunned when he thought of this. He felt that he should know that guy's name. Old Ghost had talked about that guy's past more than once. Even today he had called him Little Gongzi. But damn it, he couldn't remember that guy's name for a while. He frowned. Just as he was about to think about it, his consciousness suddenly slipped, as if he was holding a piece of slippery soap in his hand. When he exerted some force, it fell to the ground. As long as he focused his attention on that guy's name, he would soon forget what he was focusing his attention on. Forget it. That guy's name isn't important anyway. Xianxia relaxed his brows and decided to call that guy a pretty boy. That gigolo was an imposter. Xianxia was only sure about this when he said that Qin Zhao was killed by a saint. It was true that Qin Zhao had died to a so-called saint. But it was only once. It was highly likely that he was just a tool for that group of people in the sky. He had something that those people in the sky wanted. Actually, it wasn't a bad idea to leave it to them, but he had to see how Qin Zhao was doing right now. He was not inflexible, but he had his principles. That Sergeant Lao Dao was quite capable. That pretty boy seemed to be more capable than Sergeant Lao Dao. It was just that they definitely did not expect that they could cultivate their Dao technique so quickly. However, if he didn't have this ability, he wouldn't have come here. Xianxia tried to spread out his perception. Soon he experienced the feeling of being powerful, as if he could control everything, even though he was only at the concept level. The feeling of cultivation was too wonderful. If he wanted to, he could clearly hear the sounds of twigs snapping and small animals moving within a radius of 1 mile. If he narrowed the range a little, he could even hear the sound of snow falling. From this, he concluded that the pretty boy and Sergeant Lao Dao were not within 1 mile. Thus he slowly stood up. He stood where he was and stared at the flames that the pretty boy had released for a while. Suddenly, he took a step and ran toward the west. Lord Wolf's cave was in the southeast. Now he chose the opposite direction. This was the fastest way to get rid of those two guys. When he took the first step, he left a deep footprint in the snow. But when he took the second step, the footprint was already very shallow. When he took the third step, he left no trace on the snow. When he took the fourth step, his entire body turned into a ball of golden light. There was a buzzing sound in the bushes. The next moment, Xianxia had already disappeared without a trace. Li Yunxin and Lu Gongzan watched Xianxia leave in the forest and sighed softly. At least this guy had fallen into the trap. But it wasn't time to let his guard down. Xianxia couldn't sense their presence because the difference in realm between Li Yunxin and him was too great. Along the way from Yi country to this place, Li Yunxin said that he wanted to be an ordinary person. Lu Gongzan thought that he was fooling around. In fact, part of it was true. He had been away from the human world for too long. Perhaps those cultivators and demons who had slowly gotten used to it didn't matter. But for someone like him who was still alive a year ago and loved the prosperity of the world, that kind of life was too hard to bear. Killing and fighting. For a long time there were only these two things in his life. Therefore, now that it had come to an end, it could be considered as giving himself a vacation. The clothes, food, shelter, and transportation of the human world were actually very beautiful things. Therefore he had been on a sightseeing tour along the way, walking like a human. But it was also so that he could conceal himself better. For example, now, Xianxia couldn't tell the depth of his realm. He only regarded him as a guy who was slightly better than Lu Gongzan. The reason why he made this mistake was that Xianxia didn't know much about this world. It was also hard to imagine that this pretty boy was actually in the profound realm. After he learned more information, he wouldn't give Li Yunxin another chance. Therefore, this time was probably the only chance he had to fool around with Xianxia. He wanted to use him to lure someone out. Standing in the snow, Li Yunxin was silent for a while. Then he sighed in a low voice. "Let's go. Follow him from afar." He told his plan to Lu Gongzan. Therefore, Lao Dao knew that he planned to use Xianxia to lure out another person. But who that person was, Li Yunxin refused to say. He didn't ask. As he always did, he followed behind him loyally and silently. It was Xianxia's first time using the golden light escape art. At first he wasn't familiar with it, but after running for a quarter of an hour he was able to use it smoothly. Like a shooting star in the dense forest, he ran for nearly an hour in one breath before stopping to take a break. By this time he had already run 3 miles. Even if it was 30 li, it would still be enough. If it weren't for the rugged terrain in this mountain, he might have already run for more than 100 miles. But Xianxia had just stepped into the door of the cultivation world. Moreover, he had taken the last bus. If it was before, when the spiritual chi of heaven and earth hadn't been so chaotic, he would have been able to use this ability more smoothly, and he would have been able to practice other magic faster. But now he had to rely almost entirely on the spiritual energy brought by the medicinal liquid in his body to use Taoist magic. His realm was still low, and he couldn't filter out useful spiritual energy from the chaotic spiritual chi of heaven and earth like many high-level cultivators. What was happening to him now was very similar to what was described in a novel in Li Yunxin's previous world. A civilization locked down another civilization's technology by changing the way they could observe the macroscopic and microscopic universe. Now, Li Yunxin had done something similar. Many Taoist magic was created when the spiritual chi of heaven and earth was stable. Now that it was chaotic, it couldn't be cultivated. And according to the situation in the real world, even the theory might be wrong. Lu Gongzan understood this, Li Yunxin understood this, but Xianxia didn't. Therefore, when he saw Xianxia sitting cross-legged on a green stone, trying to absorb the spiritual chi of heaven and earth through meditation, Li Yunxin laughed. "It's a waste of effort." He shrugged. "That's why I said that planning ahead is one of the greatest virtues in the world. I'm afraid that this real guy is also a genius. That's why he spent so much effort to make the spiritual chi of heaven and earth like this. Even if he was a genius, he wouldn't be able to cultivate. Now look at him, ha. I'm so happy." After thinking for a while, he couldn't help but laugh. "I'm happy. Continue to be happy, ha." Lao Dao looked at him worriedly. He felt that there was something wrong with Brother Xian at the moment. As for what was wrong, he couldn't tell. He just felt that there was something wrong with his emotions. But according to the theory that Li Yunxin had told him before, once you had an intuition that something might be like this, then maybe it was because your subconscious had noticed many small details that your subjective consciousness didn't pay attention to. That was why you had this feeling. And now Lu Gongzan felt that. Li Yunxin's joy seemed to be concealing something in his heart. Was it nervousness or worry? He tried to look at the expression on Brother Xian's face inadvertently, but he didn't find anything. He tried to look at Xianxia and the distant mountains. Then a thought suddenly jumped out. The direction that Xianxia was going was the direction of Brother Xian's former hometown. Previously, when Brother Xian talked to Xianxia, he told him that they should go north. So if Xianxia wanted to escape, he definitely wouldn't choose the north. Then when they talked, they deliberately let Xianxia hear that they were going to Lord Wolf's cave. And Lord Wolf's cave was in the southeast. Therefore, east, south and north were not good choices for Xianxia. He had to go west. This was Brother Xian's usual method. When you talked to him, you didn't notice anything unusual. Then you made a decision and felt that it was your true thought. But in fact you didn't know. He was the one who told you to think so. That was the scary part. Brother Xian drove Xianxia to the west, to his hometown. Who was he trying to lure out? As this thought came to mind, Lu Gongzan immediately remembered more things along the way. Along the way, Li Yunxin looked carefree and relaxed, but he was actually very cautious. He used to think that Brother Xian was such a person. You looked at him and thought he was carefree and carefree. But in fact, when he was smiling, he was thinking more than anyone else. Now, when he carefully recalled what had happened in the past few days, he realized that Li Yunxin had done many things along the way. He had been carefully on guard. He left some tracks along the way and erased others. The ones he left behind seemed to be to let others find him. The reason why he was erased was so that others would only know his approximate location, but would not be able to pinpoint his exact location. For example, in the previous hour they had been tracking Xianxia. In fact, with their current cultivation and treasures, even if they were walking close to Xianxia's back and chatting and laughing, they had ways to make him not notice them. But Li Yunxin was watching from afar. This meant he wasn't guarding against Xianxia. It was someone else. From the moment they left Tongtian Swamp, they had already been working on this matter. Lu Gongzan was shocked by this belated discovery. But he also knew that his thoughts were not as many as Li Yunxin's. Many things were only realized when he was halfway done or finished. And Li Yunqing might have sensed his worries or he might not have. His gaze was always focused on Xianxia. Occasionally he would look around. After about a quarter of an hour, Xianxia opened his eyes and stood up from the green stone. His expression was a little puzzled and unwilling. Obviously he didn't understand why he couldn't get more spiritual power from the world, and there were a few spells he couldn't understand. Maybe he thought that Li Yunqing had done something to this scroll. So he gave up after trying a few times, afraid that he would be tricked. After a little hesitation he continued to fly west. Because there was some fear in his heart. Some unknown, vague fear, but it was enough to affect his decision. This fear was planted when he talked with Li Yunqing just now. Now it was like a poisonous flower slowly blooming in his heart. This world was dangerous. He lived in danger and fear. He had to carefully keep a distance from everyone until, he didn't know when. So another 4 hours passed. For cultivators, it wasn't difficult to travel for 4 hours. But Xianxia was still a mortal before tonight. At last he was weary after such a long journey, and he was indeed walking westward. But most of the time he was going around in circles, going in circles. This wasn't because he couldn't recognize the road, but because he encountered Li Yunqing hitting the wall. Finally, Xianxia climbed over a ridge and saw signs of human habitation. A small village with a dozen or so families scattered in the valley. There were no lights at this time. He knew this place. This was the village that old Ghost used to live in, and it was also the village that the pretty boy used to live in. It turned out that he had only walked this far after going around in the mountains for more than 4 hours. This made him anxious. But more than that, he was vigilant from the bottom of his heart when he saw this village. He had been in the mountains for many years, how could he not know the way? Someone was playing tricks. The first thing he thought of was that the pretty boy was following him. Once this idea came to his mind, he immediately crouched down and hid behind a tree. Then he planned to slowly retreat into the forest behind him. But just after 3 steps he suddenly tripped over something. He looked down, it was a few broken bricks. So he immediately knew where this was. The former residence of the pretty boy. After old Ghost mentioned Lei Bao, he and Lord Wolf both came here to take a look. What they saw was the ruins that had been completely demolished. The only thing that was considered intact was a circle of broken bricks. Damn it, he didn't even know when he came to this place. He became more vigilant. At this time he suddenly heard a low male voice. Don't move. There is a restriction set up by the Freemasons. You have now walked into the restriction. Chapter 583. A voice came from behind. It wasn't the voice of the pretty boy. Xianxia's heartstrings tightened. He almost turned around and struck out with his palm. However, he immediately realized that no matter who it was, to be able to silently appear behind him while he was concentrating, it wasn't the best choice to act rashly when facing such an enemy. Therefore he took a deep breath, slowly straightened his back and slowly turned around. The newcomer was just behind him, only 1 step away from him. The newcomer was wearing black clothes and a cloak. The night was dark and only the lower half of his face could be seen, hidden in the shadow of the cloak's hood. The strange thing was, the outline of the lower half of the face was somewhat familiar, even though there was a soft black beard on his lips and chin. The newcomer seemed to be a middle-aged man. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, giving off a calm aura. Seeing that Xianxia had turned around, the newcomer took a small step back as if to not make Xianxia more nervous. I'm the one who will guide you. You can trust me. Now do as I say. Circulate the spiritual energy in your body for a small cycle. Guard the upper and lower apertures. As he spoke, he stretched out his hand towards Xianxia. Xianxia didn't have any room to dodge. The newcomer's cultivation level was obviously much higher than his. Perhaps it was this guy who led him here. Or was that pretty boy's new plan? A sense of uneasiness rose in Xianxia's heart. This made him feel strange. On one hand, his intuition told him that the person in front of him might be the real guide. But on the other hand, a subconscious thought told him, don't trust anyone. This world is extremely dangerous. However, the newcomer had already placed his hand on his pulse. Then, a vigorous spiritual energy rushed into his body and flowed into his meridians. I see that you already know some ways of cultivation. But you've just started. If you want to walk out of this restriction without alarming it, you have to use some small tricks. You can't do it with your current realm. The newcomer's voice was deep, but it didn't make people feel disgusted. It even had a unique attraction. Now I'll give you some spiritual energy to help you form the ocean of qi and mountain of snow and step into the emptiness realm. As soon as he finished speaking, more spiritual energy rushed into Xianxia's body. Mortals could not experience such a feeling, the influx of power. In an instant, Xianxia felt that his body was filled with some kind of surging qi, and the pleasure it brought was no less than when he had just stepped into the cultivation world. There was almost no need for him to consciously control anything. His newly formed ocean of qi and mountain of snow began to operate, greedily absorbing the newly obtained spiritual power into it, making it more stable and substantial. Just like that, it only took a short 3 breaths of time. A strong and abundant power suddenly spread out from the ocean of qi and mountain of snow and violently swept through his meridians, acupoints, muscles, bones, skin, and flesh like a shock wave. Xianxia couldn't tell if it was a pleasant or painful experience. His eyes widened and he almost shook off the hand of the person who came. But she heard him say again, sure enough. Although Ting Qingshan had not truly stepped into the emptiness realm, he had already touched the threshold. Your cultivation speed is the second fastest I've ever seen in my life. Really is you. But now Xianxia's body was being battered by spiritual energy that was like waves. His meridians, muscles, and bones all changed in a short period of time. He became stronger and purer than an ordinary person. He no longer had any spare thoughts to listen to the words of the person who came. In fact, from the moment he turned around until now, only a short period of 10 seconds had passed. But now he felt as if an entire year had passed. It was as if a new world had been created in his body, and every minute experience had been magnified infinitely. After another 2 breaths of time, the person finally let go of Xianxia's hand. At this moment, Xianxia seemed to have been fished out of the water. In this cold night of early winter, his clothes were soaked with sweat. White mist rose from the top of his head and shoulders, and his face was rosy as if he had just been roasted by fire. However, his body stank incomparably. It was the smell that was forced out of his body by the spiritual energy. Now he had been forcefully pushed to the pinnacle of the intent realm by the person who came. He was only a little bit away from the emptiness realm. And the person who came seemed to be indifferent to the smell on his body. He said in a deep voice, right now the intention is to guard the central palace. Empty the foot of Shaoyang and come out. Xianxia could only understand a few of the words that the person used. However, he had previously practiced the Dao technique that Li Yunqin had given him. Now he could infer many things from one example and understand what was going on. Hearing that the person's tone was very serious, he didn't care about it for now. He did as the person said and channeled his qi. Suddenly, his body appeared in the forest 1 zhang away. The person shook his head slightly. It was as if he was secretly exclaiming, sure enough, you learn fast. Then he turned around and looked at Xianxia. You made me look for you hard. When he said this, every word seemed to be a sigh. But his tone was still surprisingly calm. Xianxia frowned at him, but his body was still tense, ready to escape at any time. Did Qining ask you to pick me up? The person nodded. Sort of. Qining is already dead. Xianxia narrowed his eyes and exhaled softly. Killed by the saint. The person looked at him and was silent for a while. He didn't answer his question. Instead, he lifted his hand and pulled down his hood. Just now Li Yunqin found you, right? Whatever I say to you now will probably make you suspicious. So there's no need to test me. I'll take you away now. When the time comes, you'll naturally know everything. This seemed to be the most correct way to deal with it. For this person, Xianxia couldn't resist at all. He would take him to a certain place and meet some people. Then everything would naturally be clear. However, at this moment Xianxia was stunned. The person who had taken off his hood had a very handsome face. Actually, for a middle-aged man, it wasn't appropriate to use the word handsome to describe his appearance. However, it didn't feel wrong to use it to describe this person, even though he had the 5 strands of long beard that were very popular among men in this era. But his appearance, this extremely outstanding appearance, was extremely similar to that pretty boy. At this moment, Xianxia realized that he had fallen into the pretty boy's trap again. He didn't hesitate anymore. He channeled his spiritual qi and chanted the incantation in a low voice, Ji. His figure immediately turned into a golden light and shot toward the vast forest like a bolt of lightning. In just a moment there was no trace of him. Only 3 deep to shallow footprints were left on the spot. However, this man wasn't in a hurry. Instead, he shook his head helplessly, like an adult watching a naughty child running away. As long as he took 2 steps, he could easily catch him back. But at this time, a voice also rang out behind him. "You also made me look for you hard." The newcomer paused. Standing where he was, he didn't turn his head. This continued for a full 3 breaths of time before he heard the person behind him say again, "Aren't you guys dead?" The tone was calm and the voice was clear. It was like he was narrating an insignificant matter. The 2 stood on the snowy ground. The newcomer was silent, his gaze staring straight ahead. But there was no focus in his gaze, as if there was no focus in his thoughts. Behind him, 3 steps away, stood Li Yunxin. He had wrapped himself in a cloak, only revealing his face, as if he was extremely afraid of the cold. However, his gaze was firm and his expression even more unswerving. After another long 3 breaths of time, the newcomer slowly turned around. Li Yunxin stared at him for a while and laughed, but his tone was still calm. It was as if the one laughing and talking were 2 different people. "It's really you, Li Chunfeng. Where's Shangguan Yu? Why isn't she here?" Li Chunfeng sighed softly. "Yun Exen, stop," said Li Yunxin expressionlessly. "You can call me Dragon King or Wei River Lord now. If you really want to call me by my name, use my surname as well. My surname was also Li in my previous life." Li Chunfeng's eyes dimmed. It was as if some light had been extinguished. So he sighed again. "All right. Today isn't the time to talk. I'll take my leave. Wei River Lord." With these words, he lifted his foot and walked away. With only 1 step, he appeared dozens of meters away. However, when he took the 2nd step, it was as if the whole space was suddenly pulled back by some force. He was back where he was. "You forgot." Standing in the snowy ground, Li Yunxin said, "I'm in the profound realm." He looked at Li Chunfeng and repeated his question. "Where's Shangguan Yu?" Li Chunfeng also looked up at him. "We'll talk about it later. But right now," Li Yunxin suddenly opened his eyes wide. "Right now? Right now what?" "Li Chunfeng, you can't go anywhere if you don't solve the problem between us. Where's Shangguan Yu?" When he said the last sentence, his tone was no longer calm. He shouted the question. So Li Chunfeng sighed for the 3rd time. "Let's talk about the problem between us first. You want to know what's going on? Then I'll tell you from the beginning. Do you want to listen?" "Humph. None of you people speak the truth." Li Yunxin smiled disdainfully. "What else is there to say?" However, he didn't leave. He was still standing in the snowy ground. Li Chunfeng let out a sigh and looked up at the sky. "I'm from Munanju. 20 years ago I had to do one thing. I had to find the translucent jade slip. But at that time the translucent jade slip was on Cloud Mountain. So you and Shangguan Yu sneaked into Cloud Mountain?" Li Chunfeng looked at Li Yunxin with a complicated look in his eyes. "No, your mother," Li Yunxin snorted and laughed. "I was a disciple of the Celestial Gate. But because I have the bloodline of the sage, I can enter and leave Cloud Mountain freely sometimes." Li Chunfeng said slowly and calmly, "So my mission was to sneak into Celestial Gate and win her favor. To become her Tao companion and get the translucent jade slip through her." Li Yunxin's disdainful look disappeared. He became expressionless again and looked at Li Chunfeng with a gloomy look. "Then I succeeded. I got the translucent jade slip through her." Li Chunfeng was silent for a long time. "You want to say that she didn't know?" Li Yunxin said slowly. "Huh. Someone who didn't know would come here from Celestial Gate with you with the translucent jade slip. Then I found out about you." Li Chunfeng interrupted him. "I told her everything. After that, we escaped here with the translucent jade slip to live in seclusion. To hide from Daotong Kenzo and Munanju." Li Yunxin opened his mouth. He laughed convulsively but quickly restrained himself. His eyes became fierce as he stared at Li Yunxin. "So touching. Are you trying to say that it was all for love for me for Shangguan Yu? What's going on? Receiving people?" He finally took a step forward and approached Li Chunfeng like a beast. "The person you are looking for, Xianxia. He should be the child of you and Shangguan Yu, right? I should be him, right? You felt that something was wrong, so you observed me for more than 10 years, pretending to be a loving father, a filial son, and a loving child." "Ha!" He laughed ferociously. but in the blink of an eye he restrained himself and stared at Li Chunfeng. It's all an act. This child. He reached out his hand from under the cloak and pointed at himself. He's just a tool. Almost no one. To be able to survive after witnessing Li Yunxin's rage, it was a miracle. But Li Chunfeng was still very calm. He looked at Li Yunxin and said, but in fact before the two of us escaped, the two fake saints on Cloud Mountain had already seen through my identity. We escaped here and lived a stable life for a while. Then the people of Munanju found me. They told me that the Freemasons also knew that we were here. They just wanted to cast a long line to catch a big fish. So they gave me a choice. Choose the child in your mother's belly to make a passage. They can guarantee your mother's safety. After it's done they will give us freedom. Or die. Li Chunfeng breathed a sigh of relief. The two of them were very close. His breath turned into white mist in the cold night and drifted to Li Yunxin's body, as if clouds and mist were rising from Long Sun's body. I know this is also Munanju's punishment for me. So I chose the latter. But in the past 14 years, he whispered, it may not be all an act. Li Yunxin slowly took a step back. He tilted his head slightly and looked at Li Chunfeng as if he was looking at a stranger. After a while he suddenly laughed hysterically. Disgusting. Disgusting. You know I have a past life. And you still said, disgusting. But Li Chunfeng's expression was extremely calm. As if any words could not hurt him. He looked at Li Yunxin, his eyes seemed to be a little sad. Who doesn't have a past life? In this world there is also reincarnation. But you next thing. He took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. His breath was a little shaky. This life is real. You are my son. Li Yunxin was stunned. For as long as 3 breaths he suddenly became furious. Without warning he blasted a palm at Li Chunfeng and roared, you are only doing this for your own life. Today I will send you on your way. It was indeed a full-strength attack. The full-strength attack of a profound realm great demon. But Li Chunfeng dodged slightly and avoided it. This situation seemed to be beyond Li Yunxin's expectation. He was stunned for a moment then blasted another palm. But Li Chunfeng's body had already floated away like the wind. His expression was still calm. The one who went to Cloud Mountain was my incarnation. The master of Munanju wanted me to use my incarnation to do that, then destroy it, sever the love connection and pass the love tribulation. He sighed, but I can't sever it now. Yunexin, your mother doesn't know. The sin is all mine. She is innocent. If you want to see her. Li Chunfeng's figure slowly disappeared. Li Yunxin angrily blasted a few more palms at him, but none of them hit him. This meant Li Chunfeng's cultivation was at least no lower than Shi's profound realm. Finally his figure disappeared. Only 4 words remained. She is on Dragon Island. Chapter 584. Li Yunxin's body suddenly froze. The snow stirred up by his palm wind was still falling from the sky, and the trees that had been blown down were rolling down the mountain. The people in the village not far away seemed to be awakened by the noise, and 2 or 3 households lit up their lights. It seemed that as soon as Li Chunfeng left, his terrifying anger had vanished without a trace. He was like a deflated balloon or like a condensed stream of iron. He stood alone in the snow and everything just now seemed like a dream. In his previous life he had seen some children. When they were angry at adults they were like little volcanoes. But if that lord left and disappeared, their anger would quickly subside. It was as if they knew that even if they made a fuss now they wouldn't get anything. Maybe it was because they were only willing to vent their anger on the people closest to them. He didn't know if he was like that now. However, the anger at the bottom of his heart quickly subsided, as if it was a storm that came and went as quickly as it came. What was left was an indescribable feeling. In fact, even he didn't know how much of his anger was real, and how much was an act he couldn't control. But of course he could understand. Whether in his previous life or this life, he understood that many emotions in the world couldn't stand the test of time. For the sake of fame, for the sake of benefits, for the sake of any reason, many people were willing to exchange something as overflowing as feelings. Because he was such a person in his previous life. In his previous life, he wasn't the producer of emotions, but he was definitely the most skilled user. He realized this when he looked into the darkness from the foot of the Free Cloud Mountain, and saw a familiar figure. But he knew that Li Chunfeng and Shang Guanyu actually had a reason to do certain things. They wanted to have a child to use. No matter who ran into the child, they would be used. He ran into the child himself, so who could be blamed? Then things developed step by step, and the various events in the past made him develop certain emotions. It was something that he was willing to do. To do great things. To use nothing. But he was stupid enough to shed a tear because of this emotion. But when he faced Li Chunfeng, when the anger rose in his heart, he realized that he might not be able to hide or suppress this emotion. Since he couldn't suppress it, he did it the way he always did. He magnified the joy by 90%. The slightest bit of anger would cause his anger to soar to the heavens. In this way, others could not figure out his feelings, and it could also be considered as putting on a good show. Perhaps he was living a free and unrestrained life, or perhaps he was hiding in the solid 7-layered fortress. He didn't care about that. But only this time, when he allowed his anger to grow unscrupulously, he felt a frightening comfort. He felt comfortable because of this anger, because he could unleash this anger on Li Chunfeng. He knew that this feeling of release had another well-known name. He felt wronged. But if he didn't mind it and had already gotten over it, why should he feel aggrieved? After standing in the snow for a full quarter of an hour, Li Yunxin gritted his teeth and spun around, shouting, "Old Lu!" Lu Gongzan dashed out of the forest. He shook his head and said, "That won't do. There's nothing left." Before Li Yunxin showed up, he gave Lu Gongzan a magical treasure. He wanted to let Li Chunfeng go so that he could track his whereabouts and find out something. But before, he only thought that Li Chunfeng's cultivation base was roughly in the true realm. He didn't expect that he was in the profound realm. The true realm and the profound realm couldn't be mentioned in the same breath, so the magical treasure in Lu Gongzan's hand didn't find anything. This was all within Li Yunxin's expectations. He slammed his palm on the ground. "Hey!" This was a sound of both anger and helplessness. A large area of the ground, the place where he, Li Chunfeng, and Shang Guanyu had once lived, was smashed into layers of mud with a loud boom, completely destroying the remaining bricks and tiles underneath. Lu Gongzan only sighed softly and still didn't say anything. By this time, all the houses in the village at the foot of the mountain had turned on their lights. They vaguely saw people looking in their direction, but they couldn't see clearly. Li Yunxin also turned his head to look at them for a while, then suddenly jumped up and disappeared into the boundless forest with a gust of evil wind. Lu Gongzan hesitated for a moment, then followed him. About a quarter of an hour later, Lao Dao saw him again. Li Yunxin sat alone on a big snow-covered rock, surrounded by trees with twisted branches. He rose from the snowy ground into the night sky, like a huge, ferocious cage. He sat alone in this cage in his cloak. He was also a ball of white. When Lu Gongzan walked to the edge of the rock, Li Yunxin sighed. "I didn't expect that." Lao Dao stood beside the rock and thought for a moment. "When did you know?" "Maybe long ago." Wei River Dragon King was silent for a while. His eyes were like that of a mortal looking at the snow. But in fact, he couldn't see anything except the snow. "Now that I think about it, I used to think that they taught me slowly because they weren't sure if they wanted me to get involved in the disputes of the cultivation world. But now looking back, it turns out that they weren't sure if I was that person. In the past, I should have known that the two of them were in the true state. They hid for so long. How could they be killed so quickly? But I still told myself that it was like that. Maybe it's because in my heart." Lu Gongzan interrupted him. His tone was gentle but also very serious. "Didn't we talk about this before? There's something in your heart. Others don't know, but I do." Li Yunxin raised his head and looked at him. "What's in my heart?" Lao Dao met his gaze. "Brother Xan told me about the study of the heart. I also learned a lot. But there's one thing called a doctor, not a doctor. You should understand." When he said this, Li Yunxin straightened his body and raised his hand. "Don't." Lao Dao shook his head. "I won't. I just want to talk like before." Li Yunxin's body withered again. Then continue. "You should understand that there are some things that you might have done to yourself, but you still don't know," Lao Dao continued. "For example, you said that you had no feelings or desires in your previous life, but you really wanted to experience it. In the end, maybe you experienced it, but that feeling also brought you more regret. So you took revenge for 10 years. If a certain kind of feeling first gave you a moment of happiness, then gave you 10 years of pain, You should be afraid. Li Yunxin stared at the snow for a while and softly said to himself, You mean? I was adopted. I was adopted and I slowly learned what it means to. He paused and skipped that word. But as soon as I experienced it, he died. Therefore it brought me hatred and great pain. And then in this life. Lu Gongzan said in a low voice, You are afraid of that kind of feeling like a tiger. But in your heart you want it. So you build up a mental defense for yourself and at the same time, you want to break your mental defense. You said that you used to have the state of mind of Taishang Wang Qing. Is it really Taishang Wang Qing? Or are you like those Daotong and Kenzo cultivators all pretending to be emotionless? However, these may not be what you did consciously. Your subconscious mind finished it. It wants to protect you. But you yourself don't want this kind of protection. So, Brother Xing should be very sad. Li Yunxin didn't say anything. Lao Dao shook his head. So there's nothing to be afraid of. You are a person who understands love and hate. In this life you feel that you have someone who loves you so you experience it. But in the end you find that everything is not the case. Everyone will be sad because of this. There's nothing to be afraid of. Li Yunxin frowned and gritted his teeth. But he lied to me, not necessarily. Lao Dao sighed in a low voice. Which parent in the world doesn't love their child? Brother Xen, it's true that they want to use you, but their feelings for each other may not be fake. They have been together for more than 10 years. And they gave birth to each other. Even cats and dogs have feelings, let alone humans. Li Yunxin snorted. Do you believe these words? Lu Gongzan looked at him. Since you left the mountain until tonight you have been under the control of Moon Enju. Then you have turned misfortune into blessing several times and escaped death by the skin of your teeth. Don't tell me he had nothing to do with it? Perhaps that Li Chunfeng has done many things for you. Li Yunxin slowly straightened his body and frowned. You speak up for him. Do you want me to be deeply grateful to him? Lao Dao didn't say anything and only looked at him. After looking at him for 3 or 4 seconds, Li Yunxin's body finally relaxed. Alas. He sighed. All right. So, Brother Xen, you know all this. There are few people smarter than you in this world. You just need some time to think about it. Lu Gongzan said this and paused for a moment. Then he said, I also need some time to think about it. The last sentence made Li Yunxin frown. What do you want to think about? The old Taoist priest lowered his gaze and smiled. I still have debts to settle. Debts? I owe someone a debt. He sighed. I owe someone 2 lives. 3. That day on Mount June I told those people that Shuk and Siki were at White Dragon Mouth. Sanhua and Jessen were also there. You did it to save me. Li Yunxin said seriously. But it was also what I said. Lao Dao also looked at Li Yunxin seriously. I did it to save you. But it also hurt them. If I don't have any guilt in my heart, how am I different from a beast? Li Yunxin was silent for a moment. Do you think I'm a beast? You also have guilt, the old Taoist said. It's just that your guilt towards them has been transferred to me. Otherwise, why did you come to me in Shanji when you entered Cloud Mountain that day? At that time demons and cultivators of Xianmen were outside. If any of them found you, you would really die. But you spent a lot of effort to come to the dungeon. Is this your style of doing things? Li Yunxin frowned and waved his hand. What's the use of saying this? It will become my inner demon. Lu Gongzan sighed again. Brother Xian. I used to be a dissolute painter. Maybe I will be poor for another 10 or 20 years and that will be the end of my life. But you told me to have other choices. You told me to cultivate, achieve the Tao and be reborn. But you and I both know that the cultivation method of those Taoists and swordsmen of Xianmen is evil. Cultivators can't be as heartless as them. Otherwise, what's the purpose of cultivation and longevity? Even if it's not for humanity or the common people, it should be for oneself. But if it's for oneself, when you cultivate you will have no desire. So these days I've been thinking, what should I be like? Lu Gongzan put his hands behind his back and paced slowly on the snow. I'm cultivating now, but how should I cultivate? Xianmen is an evil path. I can't go like that. Cultivators should be. They know more about love, sorrow and suffering than mortals. They should be compassionate and observe everything as if they were observing their own bodies. But it's because they understand that they can accept it. Because they understand without fear they can let it go. Speaking of this, he raised his head and looked up at the night sky for a long time. So I can't let go of those I.O. Xian men regard this as a taboo. But I think this is the first step of cultivation. Li Yunxin was silent. When the night wind in the forest blew the snow on the tree to his head again, he said faintly, "What are you going to do?" I remember which schools raided Dongting that day. I also remember who is still alive. On Mount Yunshan that day there should be one. The head of Danding School of Shangqing. Gui Yuanzi. Li Yunxin said. Exactly. Lu Gongzan nodded. This person is also one of the murderers. I have to kill him. Li Yunxin fell into a long silence. On Mount Yunshan that day, Senhua took him to Mount Shaoyan and he passed by the gate of Danding School of Shangqing. However, he had more important things to do at that time, so he planned to get even with Gui Yuanzi later. But things always changed. In the end he ran out of Mount Yunshan. It was a mess inside, so he didn't want to get even with Gui Yuanzi. In fact, this kind of thing should be understood by those who do great things. At that time, there were many more important things to deal with and many more important people to think about. There was no way to waste time for Gui Yuanzi. The general trend of the world was important. Once the great thing was done, Gui Yuanzi couldn't run away. Many people who were sacrificed would also be given an explanation. He thought so in his heart, so he did it. But at this time he realized that the Lu Gongzan beside him was a living and independent person. Even if he was a follower, he would have his own ideas. And in his heart Lu Gongzan was far more than that. For a long time, Li Yunxin was used to making some decisions by himself, and Lu Gongzan only needed to execute and assist. Most of the decisions he made were correct. Both he and Lao Dao benefited a lot from it. Gradually, the face of this Lao Dao who led him into the city of Wei became a little blurred. When Li Yunxin did something he would always follow him. This made him feel that it was a natural thing to do. Some private things that he was worried about could be handed over to him. For him he was a very complicated existence. But at this moment tonight, Li Yunxin realized that this existence was like himself, with an independent and complicated spiritual world. For example, his debt. After a while Li Yunxin said, Gui Yuanzi is in the real state. If he is still alive, you will die if you seek revenge on him. Lu Gongzan smiled, this is my debt. If I really die I will pay off the debt. There was a moment of silence. Li Yunxin said again, there are other debts. And her debts. Lu Gongzan said, although her corpse is gone her relatives are still there. If I kill Gui Yuanzi and don't die I will do something for them. Li Yunxin didn't say anything. After a while he suddenly frowned and looked at him angrily. I saved you from the swordsman in the caravan of Hongfu Escort Agency. I also taught you how to cultivate. You owe me the most. Then what about your debt to me? Lao Dao smiled. I'm afraid it will be hard for me to pay off your debt. But allow me to pay these first, and then slowly pay you back. Slowly pay up. Li Yunxin said to himself nervously, always slowly pay. First Li Chunfeng and Shangguanyu died. Tonight they found them and left. Now you are going to leave. Slowly pay me back. What do you have to pay me back? Pay me back with your life. After saying this he suddenly stood up from the stone and his expression became very scary. Pay me back with your life now. Lu Gongzan was stunned. But then he thought of something, frowned and shouted, Brother Xen, no. That thing is extremely precious. But Li Yunxin had already pointed her finger at him. I want it. He was now in the profound realm. Everything that Lu Gongzan cultivated was imparted to him by him. Therefore with just this finger Lao Dao's body was frozen. Even his expression froze on his face. Li Yunxin jumped off the big stone he was sitting on and waved his hand at the stone. The huge stone was instantly cut in half. The cut surface was as smooth as a mirror. Then Li Yunxin used his finger as a knife and used his demonic qi to carve on the stone. The first time he did this was in the city of Wei. He used the yang qi of the 300,000 people in the city of Wei to draw another him to ensure that his soul didn't lose its mind. He was in the void realm then and now he was in the profound realm. When he did the same thing, how could the word familiar be used to describe it? It only took him a quarter of an hour. That Lu Gongzan was drawn on the stone. Then he stared at the frozen Lu Gongzan for a while and then said, okay, if you want to repay your debt I will help you. But if you want to repay your debt like this, go and die. Is it because you feel that you owe too many people and now that you helped me get out of danger, you feel that you can die and live comfortably? Hey, there is no such thing as leaving after owing someone something in this world. It's okay if you can't pay it back now. Remember to pay it back slowly. Now I will let you pay me back slowly. After saying this, his wrist shook in the void. With a swoosh, he opened the fan in his hand. This folding fan hid the tens of thousands of souls that he collected on the battlefield. Now he used his supernatural power and shook it on the green stone. The majestic demonic chi poured into the painting on the green stone. Almost half of it was used. Then with a swoosh Li Yunxin closed the fan. He stared at Lu Gongzan for a while. He flipped out a sharp scale from his palm and smashed him into pieces of flesh and blood with a single palm strike. Chapter 585. Since Lu Gongzan's body was destroyed, only a remnant soul was left standing in the same place. Like all ghosts that were born after death, they were at a loss for a moment, not knowing what was going on. But Li Yunxin didn't hesitate. He clenched his fist, and this remnant soul was also destroyed. Everything happened in an instant. At this time, the forest returned to peace. But soon the surface of the green stone lit up. A misty golden light emerged from the portrait of Lu Gongzan. Countless strands of golden light intertwined and wandered, slowly forming the acupoints, meridians, snow mountain and ocean of qi. The old soul had been destroyed. But a new soul stood up from the green stone. The soul, painted by the only two Taoist painters of the mysterious realm, perfectly replicated Lu Gongzan's appearance, personality, memory and all the characteristics. This was also what Li Yunxin did to himself in the city of Wei. Compared to the old him, the new him was, in a sense, completely independent but also himself. This new soul of Lu Gongzan blinked and suddenly shivered. Li Yunxin also experienced this feeling. A human's soul was hidden in the body and it was difficult to separate it. After death, the ghost formed was an incomplete soul and its senses were much slower. Lu Gongzan's current situation could be considered an anomaly. He had an intact divine soul but no physical body to carry it. It was like a baby was suddenly taken out of the mother's body and placed in the cold air. Then he looked around and still couldn't help but say, "Don't." But his voice was like a slight buzz in the air, like the night wind blowing through the forest. Li Yunxin glanced at him and said with his teeth clenched, "Of course I do." Then he hit the broken scale in his hand into Lu Gongzan's soul. An invisible wave swept through Lao Dao's body, and his appearance changed slightly. When Li Yunxin first met Lu Gongzan, Lao Dao was not tall. He was slightly hunched and thin. He was a typical Jianghu man who was down and out. After that, he cultivated the heavenly wool technique that he taught him. His hair turned black and his body became sturdy. Moreover, because he had attained the emptiness realm, he had the effect of being reborn and his stature had also grown. Before tonight, he looked like a dignified middle-aged Taoist priest. But this time it changed again. Its body was once again elongated and it looked younger. He used to look like he was in his 40s or 50s, but now he looked like he was in his early 40s. Her eyes were bright and her face was rosy. If one only looked at his silhouette in the dark night, those in the know might think that he was the former Lord Tongtian Hatred. In fact, the broken scale that Li Yunxin hit into his body was left from when he killed Hatred. When he took over Qi Wen's body in the city of Wei, he possessed that piece of scale. Now he used the same trick on Lu Gongzan. Everything happened very quickly. When Lu Gongzan's body finally took shape and stood on the ground, the flesh and blood that once belonged to his body were still steaming. The newly born Lu Lao Dao immediately shouted, "Why did you use it on me?" At this moment he naturally knew that he used Hatred's emptiness. Li Yunxin had already told him about this after he entered the Cloud Mountain and rescued him. Dragons were different from other humans and demons. They had emptiness. When Qi Wen died, there was an emptiness. From Li Yunxin's point of view, this so-called emptiness was like an official position. When the former Qi Wen died, the position of the 9th Standing Committee member of dragons became empty. If someone else could fill this emptiness in some way, then he would also occupy this official position. Emptiness was made of iron, but the people on it were like flowing water. When Li Yunxin reconstructed the demon body of the 9th young master in the Cloud Mountain, he did not use emptiness. Because emptiness was extremely precious. When one became Dragon Son, he would have the strongest body in the world. He didn't need to cultivate to have a long lifespan. Many people fought for power and profit for nothing more than life. Apart from the few supreme existences in the world, who would be able to resist the temptation of becoming the Dragon's son, Yizi? But Li Yunxin just stared at him and said nothing. Lu Gongzan finally frowned and beat his chest and stamped his feet. Alas, alas. Alas, it's my fault. He seemed to be very angry and regretful. So he raised his foot and stomped hard on the ground. Immediately, a large clump of snow sprayed in all directions, and the ground where he stood was left a large pit by him. He had never thought that he would have such power and was momentarily stunned. He was stunned for a moment, but then he said, "It's my fault. I shouldn't have said those things at this time. You have this emptiness. You have this emptiness. If you go to Dragon Island, how many things can you do? Why did you give it to me?" Li Yunxin was still silent and pursed his lips. After a while he said, "If you want to repay your debt, go. Don't worry about me." Lu Gongzan sighed again and again. Alas. How can I leave now? I originally thought that Dragon Island is full of danger. If I go with you, I will be a burden. It's better to separate at this time. But now that you gave me this, how can I leave? He shook his head. The annoyance in his heart slowly turned into helplessness. He sighed softly. Forget it, forget it. I won't leave. I'll go with you to Dragon Island." Hearing him say this, Li Yunxin stared at him for a while. Suddenly, with a twist of his wrist, the folding fan in his hand once again flew towards Lu Gongzan. This move was very fast. Lao Dao couldn't dodge it in time. So he took it all, just like when Li Yunxin first took over the 9th young master's body. When he just became Dragon Son, his demon power was all gone. He only had the realm. He was like a newly appointed official. He didn't have any trusted aides or his own forces. He had to slowly cultivate and accumulate demon power. Only then would he have great power. In the past, Yazi had been at the 2nd level of the profound realm. Now that Lao Dao inherited his realm, his demon power was almost gone. When Li Yunxin's fan hit him again, the remaining demon power refined by the dead souls in the fan was all blasted into Lu Gongzan's body. In an instant, the unstoppable power destroyed his strength to the peak of the true realm. He really reached the sky in one step. At this point he had finally used up all the souls he had collected from the battle between the Taoist and Taoist cultivators. Lu Gongzan felt the changes in his body. The expression on his face became shocked and annoyed again. He frowned and circulated his qi. He seemed to want to force out the demon power in his body. However, he couldn't use this new body as he wished. For a moment he felt the power in his body was being destroyed by him. He couldn't find a way to vent it. So he raised his eyebrows and got angry at Li Yunxin for the first time. "What are you doing? Why are you throwing a tantrum? Why are you throwing a tantrum like a child?" After saying this, he stomped his feet. "I spent so much effort to get them and now they're all gone." He used to be a bandit, but he was not a vicious thief. He was more like a military counselor. People gave him the nickname Ghost Teller because he didn't show his emotions on his face. Later, he was disheartened by the death of his wife and son. He changed his name and became a street painter. Later, he got the Dragon King Temple in the city of Wei by chance. He could barely make a living, he always looked like a resigned person. Later he got to know Li Yunxin. He worked harder and never lost his temper. He had lived for 50 or 60 years in the human world and was used to the ways of the world. When he met Li Yunxin again, he felt that he was not an ordinary person and always had something special about him. However, because of his age and Li Yunxin's temperament, he always had some affection for him. Now, because it was a serious matter, he finally got anxious. He raised his eyebrows and his face turned red. Just by looking at their appearance, they looked like a pair of grumpy grandfather and granddaughter or father and son. Li Yunxin was also glaring at him darkly. But when he saw Lu Gongzan like this, he was stunned. It seemed that his anger was stopped and stagnated in his body. After a while he stepped back and closed his eyes. After a while he opened his eyes and sighed, "Okay. Hey, Lu, you can go." He also wanted to ask Lu Gongzan to go. But his tone was calm now, even though he was full of anger before. In the calmness he seemed to be remorseful and self-blaming like Lu Gongzan. This made old Lu blush and frown. He was also stunned. The two stayed silent in the winter night and in the snow for a while. Old Lu walked 2 steps to Li Yunxin. Brother Xen, what's wrong with you? Li Yunxin looked at him for a while and shook his head. You're right. I'm a kid. I'm childish. I have a childish temper. Seeing him like this, Lu Gongzan really felt sorry. He hurriedly said, those words don't count. Li Yunxin smiled sadly and raised his hand to interrupt him. No. You're right. I thought God was dead and I was the son. Lu Gongzan didn't quite understand this sentence. He didn't know if the so-called God was the God of heaven in the folklore. But he could understand what Li Yunxin meant. He was about to speak when he heard Li Yunxin say, alas. I told Su Sheng about this before we went to Yunshan. At that time I said that everyone thinks they are the protagonist of this world. Even if they are just an insignificant child beggar, their perception of the world is also presented with themselves as the center. But at that time I thought I saw through everything. But today I found that I haven't. Alas. You are all in the background. Li Yunxin shook his head and sighed. He took 2 steps back and sat down on the smooth rock. You are all in the background. Everyone else is in the background. I think about my own matters, I think about my own thoughts, I think about my worries. Everyone feels that they are the most wronged and have it the hardest. It's hard to consider the feelings of others. Speaking of this, he looked at Lu Gongzan as if he was very emotional. Old Lu, you keep surrounding me. You understand my thoughts and my pain. I'm slowly getting used to it. But in the end you also have your grievances and pain. Lu Gongzan shook his head slightly. Brother Xen, let's not talk about this. Of course I have to. Li Yunxin lowered his gaze. He paused and said softly, yes. I feel wronged and sad. The parents who gave birth to me might be the ones who helped me. They lied to me and said that they were dead so that I would feel sad. Then they went to find someone else. I met all kinds of strong enemies along the way. I was in a dangerous situation. But you must be sad too. Sad that the person closest to me was killed by a friend. It's probably hard for me to understand this feeling even now. With me, your life has been turned upside down. But you used to be immortal. You have to adapt to these upheavals. You don't have a golden finger and you don't have any experience from your past life. These things must be very difficult for you. Lu Gongzan sighed repeatedly and waved his hand. Don't mention it. Sigh, don't mention it. However, Li Yunxin didn't stop. Some time ago. Sure, queasy. Sigh. Only the two of you know how you and her feel. I'm not a person who understands this kind of feeling. It's even more difficult for me to understand if it doesn't happen to me. I just met Li Chunfeng and had a talk with him. When I think about how you feel, I don't even dare to imagine how uncomfortable you must be. Back then when Shirqueezy was seriously injured, I could have saved her. Li Yunxin clenched his fist and lightly hammered the blue stone. But what did I think? If I want to save her, I should save her as a complete living person. Otherwise I should just wait. Even if she doesn't die, it's still better than becoming a puppet or a ghost cultivator. I've never thought about you. Even if you look at her corpse in the ice coffin every day, you'll feel better. I didn't understand back then. After meeting Li Chunfeng, I also experienced it. But it's not even 1/1000th of what you experienced back then. Old Lu, I've let you down. After hearing Li Yunxin's words, Lu Gongzan finally fell silent. He didn't sigh or speak anymore. After a while he turned around and rolled up his sleeves to wipe his eyes. Li Yunxin smiled again. I'm a person, without a heart. It doesn't matter if I become a human, a ghost or a demon. But you have a heart. When I became a demon you followed me and killed people. At the bottom of Cloud Mountain, you saw me talking to a group of demons about dividing the world and the catastrophe of the human Tao. I don't have any morals or conscience, but you do. In order to save me, those few little demons died. You feel bad about it. At this point he shook his head. In my previous life, I gave guidance to some people who had shot and killed people. Those people were still like that under those circumstances. What about you? Lu Gongzan's back was facing him. He said in a trembling voice, Brother Xen, don't. Li Yunxin nodded. Let's not talk about it. Lu Gongzan stood in the messy snow, while Li Yunxin sat on a blue stone. The two of them stood like this for a while. Then Li Yunxin said faintly, So old Lu, I'm serious. Go. Don't mention anything about how precious it is or whatnot. What you've done for me, you deserve 10 times the compensation. This kind of thing, if I don't give it to someone I trust, who else can I give it to? Lu Gongzan slowly turned around. Brother Exa, I'm afraid I won't be able to rest easy with you like this. Li Yunxin looked at him. What's there to be worried about? I feel like I'm a human now. I feel weak, confused, and have a weakness. Lao Dao was silent. Li Yunxin stood up and sighed softly. He heaved a sigh of relief. I've finally thought things through. I can't be a child anymore. Some people, even in death, have never truly matured. I'm probably that kind of person. Li Yunxin smiled. Another form of expression. Chapter 586. His smile. It was hard to tell if it was melancholy or sadness. However, it was a complicated meaning that Lu Gongzan could not understand. Thus he did not know how to comfort Li Yunxin. In the past, whenever Li Yunxin was sad, he could talk to him and tell him to get better quickly. But now Lao Dao had a lot of troubles and worries in his heart. If it were not for the fact that he could not bear it and had reached the limit of what an ordinary person could bear, he would not have said it tonight. Thus he was speechless and could only stand opposite Li Yunxin. After a while he said, Brother Exen, then I need to think about what I want to do. Li Yunxin sighed in a low voice. He took 2 steps and sat down on the green stone. I probably should not live like this anymore. Lu Gongzan did not know how to live like this. In fact, most people did not know either. They were born into this world. Regardless of the environment or the conditions for growth, they had no choice. Many people might have different thoughts and longings, but they were limited by reality. Most of the time, what a person would become after a long time was not something he could decide himself. Instead, it was what the environment changed him into. For these people, if nothing unexpected happened, the path of their lives had been planned from the moment they were born. They could see the end with a glance. Why would they need to think about how to live? Only a very small number of lucky people were born to stand at the peak. Thus, they could decide what path they should take in the future. Even so, there were many restrictions on these people. A year ago, Lu Gongzan belonged to the majority of people. Now he had become the latter. He had a long lifespan and great power that surpassed ordinary people. Thus, he could try to do something he wanted to do. For example, today's debt repayment. As for Li Yunxin, Lao Dao frowned. Brother Exen, what do you mean by that? Li Yunxin was silent for a while and sighed. In the past, I did not know why I was alive. Mortals are affected by lust and their lives are indeed very bitter. But I know what I live for. To live for my parents, to live for my wife and children. There are also people who say that they want to live for themselves. But now that I think about it, I'm really only living for myself. I'm just like how I used to be. I don't know why. What am I? He was a single person, but he also carried the expectations and emotions of many people. Whenever we talk about the concept of self, we are not talking about an individual, but a net and a point that is made up of all of our emotional and social relationships. Without this net, for example, there is only one person in this world. Then what does he use to please himself? In fact, there is nothing that can please himself. Li Yunxin said in a low voice, I know this. I only look at the flowers on horseback and I don't care about anyone. The prosperity of the human world is like passing clouds to me, but there will always be a time when I get tired of it. I should thank the 9th young master, thank the Freemasonry, thank Shen Men's Munanju. If it weren't for these people who put me in a dangerous situation of life and death, maybe I would be tired of this world even faster. At that time, maybe suicide is the only way to choose. Lao Dao was about to speak after hearing this. Li Yunxin shook his head and smiled. Lonely. It's lonely at the top. So, I have to catch something. Life is a vast ocean and people are lonely boats. If I don't want to drift with the current, I have to give myself an anchor. Lu Gongzan fell into deep thought after hearing this. He frowned and thought for a while. Suddenly he asked, Brother X, didn't you have this anchor in the past? Li Yunxin smiled, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. Which past are you asking about? Lao Dao hesitated for a long time. Finally, he said something he had wanted to say for a long time. Can you tell me all of them? It was already late at night. The clouds parted and the moon shone brightly. Li Yunxin sat on a smooth blue stone, bathing in the moonlight. He was silent for a while before saying, Okay. but there must be wine. After saying this, he flipped his palm and took out a silver pot. He put it on the rock and looked at it. He said, "It's still cold." So he felt in his sleeve and took out a small red clay stove. This stove was used to warm wine. It was very small and unique. Placed on the blue stone, Li Yunxin in white next to it, it was like a painting. He flicked his finger and a rootless fire burned under the stove. After a while there was some warmth. Lu Gongzan thought for a while and jumped on the blue stone sitting opposite Li Yunxin. Li Yunxin reached out and gouged out 2 stones from the rock. Then he stuck out his sharp nails and dug out the inside. Thus they became 2 wine cups. He and Lu Gongzan each had a cup, but they didn't put the silver pot on the stove to warm it. Both of them liked drinking cold wine but didn't like cold food. "The last time I sat with you like this was in the city of Wei," Li Yunxin said. "That night I wanted to take over Long Jiu's body." Lao Dao poured wine for him, then for himself. They raised their cups without a word. The 2 drank it in one gulp. Li Yunxin smacked his lips and laughed. Without wine, it becomes drinking to drown one's sorrows. So he stretched out his hand and gouged out 4 round green pebbles from the rock beneath him. He looked at the stones and put his hand on the stove. He squinted his eyes and looked at the stones in the heat and shimmer. He said in a low voice, "There was an old man. He drank and ate like this." After saying this, he was silent for a long time. In the darkness of the night, his face was slightly yellowed by the light from the fire in the small stove. Lu Gongzan knew that when he spoke in such a tone and fell into such silence, he was ready to reminisce about the past. He clearly looked young, but he had many fleeting memories to look back on. "I don't remember how old I was when I was adopted. 7 or 8 or 9 years old. Probably when I was a child." Li Yunxin opened his mouth and said in a low and light voice, "I probably told you about this before. I had a vulgar background and grew up in an orphanage. Just like a charity." Lu Gongzan nodded. Then an old man came. At that time he was about the same age as you. He had 1 eye and didn't look kind at all. His words were like thunder. He always roared. But it's not like his ears are bad. Li Yunxin reached out and turned the stones on the stove as if he was roasting meat. The stones were turned over and didn't make a sound. He reached out and picked up some snow that had fallen from the tree and scattered it on the stove. Finally it cried out. It sizzled as if the fat on the meat was dripping. "Choose some children." I didn't like any of them. I was asked. I said this child might have some mental problems. You would be a burden if you brought him back. The old man asked, "Can he take care of himself? Is he obedient?" He said he is obedient and can take care of himself. The old man said, "That's it." Lu Gongzan shook his head and laughed. "There's something wrong with his brain." At that time I thought they were weird. They also thought I was weird. I didn't want to talk to them. I couldn't understand why they were always laughing and crying. Li Yunxin flicked his cup. He picked out the wine from the silver pot and filled their cups again. He held the cup in silence for a while and drank it in one gulp. Then he brought me back. He named me Li Si. Li Si as in Zhang Li Si. The old man was a fortune teller. He was in his 60s and his health wasn't good. His life had been smooth and he made a few small fortunes. He felt that he could be considered a master. He didn't want his skills to be lost. But he was alone and wanted to find someone with a tough life to teach him. So he found you. Li Yunxin smiled slightly. It wasn't me. I found a very smart child. He knew how to read people's thoughts and expressions. Unfortunately, his fortune-telling skills weren't that good. He was lucky to make a fortune. A few rich people supported him and gave him some money. He became complacent and spent money everywhere. Then his luck ran out and he didn't see right and he became depressed again. He thought that raising that child and disciple was no problem. In the end, both of their livelihoods became a problem. What should I do? I had to think of a good idea. At that time there was a subsidy. It was said that the orphanage would give a handicapped child. Then I was chosen. Lu Gongzan was surprised. With such a court, it's really a blessing for the common people. Li Yunxin laughed. I was thinking of adopting a handicapped child. It didn't cost much to raise this child and I could still make some money. If it was a smart child like me who could take care of himself, he could even serve them. I came out. And then that smart child died. In the summer I ran out to play. I ran to the railway to catch dragonflies and put nails on them. One time a train accidentally fell on the railway and was crushed into meat paste. Li Yunxin said, "It was an accident. This kind of thing can't be helped." Lu Gongzan pursed his lips. After thinking for a while, he also drank the wine in his cup. The old man was sad for a while, but he recovered soon. "But I'll be fine soon." Li Yunxin snorted softly. It was hard to tell if he was snorting with a smile or if he was just breathing unconsciously. At first I thought that child was smart and learned everything quickly. Slowly I realized that he didn't learn quickly. He didn't learn anything. He would only say obedient words in front of the old man to coax him. Once he was out, he would be exposed. Some people have high EQ but not high IQ. It's probably this kind of person. Lao Dao raised the pot and was about to pour the third cup of wine for the two of them. However, there was a rustling sound in the pot as if some ice had formed in the wine. Therefore he didn't use his divine ability, but only brought the silver pot to the side of the stove and slowly roasted it. And then it was what I told you before. I lived a stable life. I had clothes to wear and food to eat. The old man originally raced me like a dog. After that child died, he beat me up and planned to find another disciple. But I'm not really stupid. When he taught that child, I listened on the side. It was very easy and I understood after listening to it once. Slowly, I also learned some of the human heart, so I talked to him and used some tricks. He realized that I wasn't really stupid. In other words, although I was stupid, I excelled in a certain field. Chapter 587. He thought it was bad luck to be in that line of work. Prying into the secrets of the heavens. Or he could believe in Buddhism and do good deeds to accumulate good karma. But he didn't believe in those. Therefore I felt that since my fate was not good and I had to offend the heavenly cursed lone star, it was fine to find someone like me as a disciple. In the future I'll have nothing to worry about and live a lonely life. There's nothing to distract me with. Then teach me. Lu Gongzan sighed and poured the third cup of wine for the two of them. Then it was still very hard. The old man likes to drink. Li Yunxin picked up the third cup and downed it. At the beginning of the month I have money, so I eat and drink to my heart's content. I don't have any money at the end of the month and I can't borrow money anywhere. What should I do? At this point his lips curled into a smile. This smile seemed sincere and pure. He raised his hand and pointed at the stove. Pick up a few pebbles to go with the wine. Roast it slowly. When it's hot, it's ready to eat. Sprinkle some salt on it. Put it in your mouth and smack it. A glass of wine. As he spoke, he picked up a pebble that had been roasted until it was slightly red. He looked at it and put it in his mouth. There was a sizzling sound and steam came out of his mouth and nose. Smacking his lips, he chewed on it like he was chewing on a candy bean and swallowed it. Lu Gongzan was stunned. He quickly poured a fourth cup for the two of them and Li Yunxin drank it in one gulp. Sometimes when he was drunk he would say to me, Grandpa treats you as his own grandson. Grandpa will have to depend on you when he dies." Of course he couldn't remember anything after he woke up. He was still merciless when he beat and scolded them. I remember the number of fractures. I can't remember the exact number. Later, someone came to pay a visit. I caught him hitting me. It was time to go to school. I thought, oh, I can still go to school. The visitor asked me if I wanted to leave. I thought, what the old man is teaching me is interesting and I haven't finished learning it yet. Let's wait and see. Just say you're not leaving. Then they gave me more subsidies and forced me to go to school. Li Yunxin shook his head and smiled. Only after I went to school did I realize that reading is more interesting. It turned out that not all people were idiots. There were also some smart people who wrote very smart things. At first he went to a special education school. Later on his results were not bad and he was reported in the papers. People would say, oh, he's actually a genius. That's why I transferred to another school and kept studying. I was about 11 when I was in primary school. I was about 18 when I got my master's degree. Master? It's similar to a cultivation realm. Li Yunxin said, for example, in the secular world, the great painters of the emptiness realm are incredible. At that time I had probably reached the pinnacle of the conception realm. The old Taoist nodded. After all, he had traveled the world for decades so he could understand. I didn't see him much in those few years and his health was getting worse, so I guess we were on good terms. So it was only one eye. The remaining eye wasn't that good either. When I met people I would bring up the newspaper and say, This is my grandson, he's going to take care of me when I'm old. Actually, it was Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease, you know? Lu Gongzan shook his head and sighed sympathetically. I know. I'm getting senile. Li Yunxin smiled noncommittally. He picked up the second stone from the stove and put it in his mouth. His eyes were unfocused as he chewed slowly. After swallowing it, he didn't open his mouth and ate another piece. After the fifth glass of wine, he said, and then, one day. The day I graduated. I was studying in another province. It's in another prefecture capital. The old man is acting up. He insists that he wants to see me parade the streets. But he didn't have money. Just like before, he asked around. When he found out where the opening ceremony was, he ran there and wanted to bless people and earn money. That day was the opening ceremony of a clubhouse. The boss wasn't a good person. Lu Gongzan smiled awkwardly. This was what he used to do. Perhaps when Brother Xian first met him, he became close to him after entering the city of Wei, and even settled down in the Dragon King Temple. It was because of the previous life. It could be considered a good fate. But he frowned slightly and sighed. He knew that what followed would not be a warm story. The old man was silly at that time. He ran to the door and said some inauspicious things. Probably it was a bloody disaster when he would lose money and what the master wanted. He didn't do such things in the past, saying it was embarrassing. That day he was possessed and said it was very unpleasant. If it was normal, he would coax them away and give them some money. This boss used to be a vagabond. He had a lot of properties under his name. He didn't need to come to the opening ceremony of a small clubhouse. But he was in a good mood, so he came to take a look. Then he ran into this. That's good, an old immortal, invite him in. Then he invited him to drink. Said a group of people gathered in the hall to watch him drink. The old man hadn't drunk for a long time. So he drank freely, and became delirious again. Then the boss said that the old immortal had enjoyed himself. Give him a red packet and send him away safely. Li Yunxin smiled, drove him to the crossroads, dropped him off and left. Lu Gongzan was silent. At this point, the people in this world might not understand. But he could understand it now. Li Yunxin had described to him some aspects of the previous world, so he knew that the cars there did not use horses. The iron shell was very powerful. That old man died, probably on the road under the car. Then I went back and found out about it. I asked first and found out that it was already done. That person was famous and had many connections. No one could make things difficult for him. Then how did I feel at that time? Actually, there was no special feeling. People die when they die. Everyone would die one day, right? But I don't seem to have anything to do. Li Yunxin frowned slightly and said in a low voice, I used to be young and didn't know anything. As long as he was alive, so be it. Then I met the old man and was beaten and scolded, but I found life a little more interesting. In fact, life has always been interesting, not necessarily because of him. Maybe it would have been more interesting if I met someone else. But now that he is gone, what should I do in the future? I thought about it, and for the first time I felt a little anxious. It was like a ship. There used to be a port. Now that the port was destroyed, it floated on the sea. Then who am I? What do I want to do? Where do I want to go? I don't know. So I need an anchor. Li Yunxin glanced at the wine pot. Lu Gongzan silently picked up the wine pot and was about to pour him wine. But the pot was light, it was empty. Li Yunxin crushed the cup in his palm. He picked up a few large pieces of stone and slowly put them on the stove. Then I will take revenge, he said. This can be an anchor. That person is powerful and I am just a young man with nothing. I came little by little and lived for revenge. It is good to have a goal in life like this. Actually, like those ghosts, they must have an obsession. Without their obsession, they would become a lonely boat that would vanish into thin air. It took me 10 years. I caught him, and then started my revenge. This time Li Yunxin paused for a long time. Then he picked up the fourth pebble and ate it. But at that time I suddenly thought of a problem. After I take revenge, what should I do? After taking revenge, there is nothing to do. What is the point of living? Since there is no point, why not die? There are many feelings in the world that I can slowly observe and slowly imitate. Only when I die, maybe I don't need to imitate the feelings I have when I die. Maybe I can really experience it. So I decided to die and see. It is not a big deal. After taking revenge, I will also die. How about asking this person to do me a favor? Let's find an opportunity to find his men. Then he was killed, covered his face with a towel, and suffocated to death. Li Yunxin thought for a while. Unfortunately, I still don't feel anything. Lu Gongzan moved his lips and lightly exhaled. Then after coming here, the situation was similar for a long time. I experienced something, but I don't know if I can rely on it. I am afraid of the feeling of drifting with the current. Then I met you. Li Yunxin raised his head and looked at Lu Gongzan. You're like an old man. I tried to find an anchor for myself, to find a way to go back and complete my revenge. Then I can have fun in this world again. But recently I began to panic again because it has been less than a year. Li Yunxin sighed. I reached the profound realm from the emptiness realm. I don't dare to think about what will happen after a year. If I find a way to go back after a year, what should I do? So, on Cloudy Mountain I only said that I reached the profound realm. I am afraid that if I have more power things will go more smoothly. Lu Gongzan was speechless. I am afraid that I will advance too fast. Only Li Yunxin could say such arrogant words. Lu Gongzan wouldn't feel that something was amiss if he said it. Instead, Lu Gongzan could understand his distress. At this time the gravel on the stove was slightly red from the heat. Li Yunxin flicked his finger and extinguished the rootless fire under the stove. He collected the gravel in his palm and put it into his mouth. But now, I think I shouldn't be like this. He chewed the gravel loudly as he spoke. His voice was still very clear. I used to have a problem with my head. I don't have it now. You are right to say that I am childish. I am like a child now. I have to experience all the love and sorrow from the beginning. My previous life is almost non-existent. But I have the memory of my previous life, so I am afraid to try new feelings. If a person is not born ignorant, who would be willing to experience the so-called sorrow and hurt again and again, and then grow up in the process? But now, I know that I can't. I can't wrap myself in a shell for the rest of my life. However brave this shell makes me, it also makes me cowardly. So I think, maybe I need a new anchor. He shook his head. I still need some time. Before I get through this time I still need a new anchor. Otherwise I will panic again. Lu Gongzan was thoughtful for a while before he said, Your new anchor, what is it? Li Yunxin stood up. Under the moonlight he said, It's you. You and I are relatives, teachers and friends. We entrust our lives to each other. I have taught you a lot and you have taught me a lot. Thanks to your care I am living a good life. I also dare to slowly see the world and experience some things. In my previous life I experienced some precious feelings, but I didn't know it. In this life I re-experienced the feelings of my previous life in you. Only then did I know who I was in the past and what kind of life I lived. But these, I didn't know much before. I only realized it when I saw Li Chunfeng today. Li Yunxin smiled. So, don't die. Otherwise I will be a lonely boat. Lu Gongzan was stunned for a while. Then he took a deep breath and stood up slowly. Brother X and I, he said in a low voice, I didn't know before. But Li Yunxin smiled. Go. I'm not a child anymore. Lu Gongzan frowned and stared at him. After a long time his brows relaxed and he said loudly, Okay. I will ride the wind and leave. I will pay my debts, take revenge, and come back alive. I will accompany you to find out, what is the purpose of living forever in this world and what should it be for? After saying these words he no longer hesitated and lingered. The Taoist robe on his body suddenly fluttered, and his whole body flew with the wind, directly shooting toward the horizon. Only his faint voice could be heard, Fast wind. This wind also caused Li Yunxin's cloak and robe to flutter violently. He sighed in a low and gentle voice and laughed. Send the gentleman off with the wind. You will know once we part. Chapter 588. So you are the only elegant man in Whitewater Town. Look at this place, watching the sea and listening to the waves. Wow, how grand and spacious it is. The speaker stood on the wooden balcony. He wore a white robe with red embroidery and gold threads. His curly black hair was tied behind his head, but a few strands hung down his cheeks. His eyebrows and eyes were deeper than those of ordinary people from the Central Plains. Now he raised his hands and sighed while facing the sea, looking like a madman. The balcony was built on a cliff by the sea, which was not very high. Behind it was a guest room that wasn't luxurious, but was definitely elegant and unique. It was very big. It could almost be called a palace. In the distance there was the vast sea under the hazy sky. The waves on the sea were a little big, with layers of white waves stacked on top of each other. They rushed over and hit the cliff under the balcony, rolling up large pieces of snow and bringing a fishy smell like iron. The person who spoke sighed with emotion. He then turned around and looked at the man in white who was sitting idly in the room. Only you and I can enjoy this scenery. What would other people in the town say? They say it's damp, fishy and harmful. Liu Baishui have dominated the Western countries for more than 10 years. How do you feel now? Have I lived a short life? Now it was winter. There were icicles hanging on the edge of the balcony. But the man called Liu Baishui only wore a thin robe and his chest was exposed. It seemed that his body was very healthy and strong, as he said. But compared to him, the man in white in the room seemed to be afraid of the cold. A white fox fur cloak was hanging on the side. He was wearing a thick winter coat with a fur collar up to his neck. There was a brazier in front of him with the charcoal fire flickering. There was an iron grill on the brazier with 5 or 6 chestnuts roasting. The fierce sea wind blew in. He squinted at Liu Baishui and smiled. Brother Liu, your machete skills are first class in the world. Your internal force is even more vigorous. Of course I have nothing to say. But didn't you say there was a woman who lived here before? Is she not a refined person? Liu Baishui waved his hand. Of course, a woman is not a refined person. He should be a beauty. After saying this, he blinked his eyes and said, ever since I accidentally mentioned that woman today, Brother Li has already asked around 4 times. Could it be that you recognize her? Thus, the extremely handsome man in front of him smiled again. Nothing can be hidden from Brother Liu. I came to the east this time to look for someone. Oh? Who are you looking for? Madam. The man in white smiled. When I was in my teens there was a huge change in my family. My mother is missing. Recently I heard that he might have left some traces in Donghai. Some even said that he might be in the Dragon Islands. That is why I am here, and to go out to sea to find it if need be. Go to sea. Liu Baishui raised his eyebrows. How? The man in white was still smiling. She's my mother after all. Liu Baishui shook his head. Although you and I have only known each other for a few days, I know that your inner strength is stronger than mine. But going out to sea in this season is not a wise move. Dragon Island outside the sea. He squinted his eyes and turned to look at the vast sea. Everyone says it's a legend. Some people say that their ship drifted to the Dragon Island after a shipwreck. But the appearance of the Dragon Island in everyone's mouth is different, so it is not enough to prove it. Brother Li, if you want to go out to sea to find the Dragon Island in this season, it will be difficult. The man in white grunted in acknowledgement. He lowered his eyes and thought for a while, then sighed. Even Brother Liu thinks so. His words were full of melancholy. Liu Baishui hurriedly waved his hand. Hey Brother Li, don't be like this. Let me think. Liu Baishui seemed to be a warm-hearted hero. Seeing that this man was lonely, he frowned and paced back and forth in the room. Then he turned to look at him seriously. Brother Li, let me ask you first. The woman you mentioned and the woman I mentioned. I brought a portrait with me. The man in white reached into his sleeve and took out a small scroll. He paused and unfolded it in front of him. He stared at it for a while and sighed. My mother's name is Xianxia. I have been carrying this for many years. Liu Baishui walked over to take a look. He was stunned when he saw it. Then he looked at the man in white. Brother Li, is this really your mother? The man in white, or Li Yunxin, smiled faintly. My mother had a miraculous encounter when she was young. She obtained a scroll of nourishment of life. He practiced it for many years. It can be considered a technique to preserve her youth. Liu Baishui stared at the portrait for a while and took a step back. If this portrait is correct, the person who stayed in this room last spring is your mother. Li Yunxin raised his head. Brother Liu, please elaborate. But Liu Baishui took another step back and looked at Li Yunxin carefully. Brother Li, before I say anything, let me ask you first. Did you know that someone saw your mother in my shop, so you came to make friends with me? Or did you hear me mention it today? Li Yunxin took a deep breath and her expression became solemn. If there is any falsehood in my words, let my body and soul perish. I will never be able to cultivate any more profound martial arts in this life. Lu Baishui immediately frowned. Hey, Brother Li, how can you say that? Hey, it's my fault. I was just asking casually. Li Yunxin's oath made this hero feel ashamed. He sighed and said, Oh? I was just afraid that you might have something else. Forget it. I was being a villain and was being too careful to guess your heart. Li Yunxin said seriously. Brother Lu, you are a straightforward man and don't hide anything. That is the way of a gentleman. Since you and I are on the same wavelength, there is nothing we can't talk about. Brother Lu, don't take it to heart. Lu Baishui still shook his head. It's my fault. It's my fault. Li Yunxin met Lu Baishui 4 days ago. Now he was in the viewing room of the Donghai Inn. The Donghai Inn was in the northeast of Whitewater Town. Whitewater Town was under the jurisdiction of the Donghai Kingdom's Stormy Waves Road. As for the Donghai Kingdom, it was a small place. Its territory was about the same as the former Yu Kingdom, only about the size of a prefecture in the Qin Kingdom. Li Yunxin said goodbye to Lu Gongzan and headed east before he realized this problem. Everyone knew that Dragon Island was in the east and that Shinryu lived on it. He also knew that the true dragon lived on the Dragon Island, but where was the Dragon Island? To the east of the Donghai Kingdom was the vast sea. It would be difficult to find Dragon Island. He had the imperial map of heaven and earth in his hand, and the location of Dragon Island was indeed marked on the map. But what was worse was that the marked Dragon Island was represented by dotted lines. This meant that either the map was not certain, or the location of Dragon Island had changed. So he asked with the talisman he had left with Bai Yunxin. It was true. There were very few people who had been on Dragon Island. Even the few who had been were summoned by Shinryu. It was unprecedented that the former Lord Dongting went to Dragon Island by himself. At that time, the news of Lord Dongting's death on Dragon Island spread so fast. He didn't know if this was a factor in it. Maybe he could wait for Shinryu to summon him. But with his temperament, he didn't like to be in a passive situation. He wanted to sneak in quietly, or take a look around the perimeter before doing so. Because there was another purpose for this trip. To find Shangguanyu. He had to be familiar with her so that he wouldn't be embarrassed. This kind of thing that even demons and cultivators couldn't do was very difficult. But after entering the Donghai Kingdom, Li Yunxin found that the customs here were very different. Although the countries along the way had different customs, the East Sea Nation was the exception among the others. For example, the people of Li Kingdom, Qin Kingdom, Yi Kingdom and other countries in the Central Plains believed in immortals and demons. But this belief was not absolute belief. It was more like a custom that permeated every aspect of life. When they encountered difficulties, they prayed for blessings from heaven. When they encountered bad luck, they scolded demons for causing trouble. They believed that there were demons and immortals in the world. But it was hard to believe that those things would really appear in front of them. For example, everyone knew about the existence of Shinryu and thought that the wind, thunder, clouds and rain in the sky were all controlled by the Dragon King. But where were the dragons and what did they look like? Maybe there were many self-proclaimed knowledgeable people who smiled and thought that this kind of thing was only spread in the marketplace. If they really looked into it, it would be ridiculous. But the Donghai Kingdom was different. Almost everyone that Li Yunxin had met believed in the existence of Shinryu and knew that it lived on Dragon Island. There were also many people who swore that they had seen the dragon's body. In the hearts of the Donghai people, Shinryu was not a vague image, nor was it an illusory god in the legends. Instead, it was tangible and could even be touched. He had also seen a holy image of Shinryu painted by the Donghai people, which was very similar to the Lord of Shinryu he had seen. Because of this, Li Yunxin realized one thing. Maybe because the Donghai Kingdom was very close to Dragon Island, Shinryu might have been here more than once. That was why there was such a strong belief. Since this was the case, it meant that the Donghai people, especially the people of Baishui Town, said that they had seen Dragon Island was true. So he planned to start with these mortals. On one hand, he could fool people. Ever since he fled from the mountain village in Dingzhou until he met Li Chunfeng in the mountain village, he seemed to have been in the sights of Mu Nanju and the Freemasonry. At this time he felt that he had temporarily escaped from that net. So he didn't want to be in the sights of those people again. Since this was the case, he had to do something unexpected. Who would have thought that the Lord of Wei River would ask mortals where Dragon Island was and how to get there? On the other hand, there was a vast ocean to the east of Donghai, which was no different from the ocean that Li Yunxin had seen in his previous life. But he knew that if he went further, it would not be seawater. It would be something called weak water. One couldn't float on the weak water. The magical powers of demons and cultivators would be gradually weakened by the weak water, and they would eventually lose their strength. If Dragon Island was surrounded by the weak water, then if he wanted to sneak across, he would have to travel with mortals. It was true that fiendish demons had powerful bodies. But in the vast world and the vast ocean, once he lost his magical powers, no matter how strong his body was, it would be no different than a grain of sand in the vast ocean. At that time he could only rely on human ships. When he came here from Dingzhou he was very fast. Shanji, who accompanied the 9th young master, was much slower than him because he had extra instructions from Li Yunxin. He stayed in Baishui town for a few days and learned that they would arrive in a dozen more days, so he wandered around a bit more. He liked the prosperity of the human world and the customs here were different, so he felt comfortable. Then he happened to hear someone mention that he had seen a woman at the East Sea Inn in town last spring. It was said that the woman was very beautiful, so the speaker, the owner of the cosmetics shop opposite the Donghai Inn, had a deep impression of her. He also said that the woman's surname was very rare in Donghai Kingdom. It was Shangguan. As everyone knew, people with compound surnames were mostly descendants of the royal family in Midland. Thus, even 2 years later the boss still remembered it vividly. Then he heard it from Li Yunxin. He spent 3 days investigating the person who spoke and confirmed that this person wasn't sent by some other force to spread the news and trap him. Then he walked into the Donghai Inn. He got to know Lu Baishui. Lu Baishui was a big shot in Baishui town and even in Donghai Kingdom. It was said that he was an orphan when he was young and grew up in Baishui town. When he was 13 or 14 he went out to wander in Jianghu, but he almost died. But in the end he was chosen by an elder of the sect of Flame in the West Plains, and was accepted as a disciple. After he finished his studies he started to wander and became a merchant. He traveled back and forth between the East and West, earned a lot of money and met many heroes. After he became famous he returned to Baishui town and built the Donghai Inn. Everyone in the town knew that he would come here to spend the winter in winter. Of course, the most important thing was that he had money and time. People like him had traveled all over the world, and although he didn't hate the world he would gradually lose interest in many things. Besides, he was a hero who was good at martial arts. He had to think about other things. Since he was born in Baishui town he grew up listening to the legends of Shinryu and Dragon Island. Although he was not as faithful as the people of Donghai Kingdom after traveling for more than 10 years, it also made him think about something else. Where were Shinryu and Dragon Island? What else was above the vast sea? He thought he had seen most of the things on the land. He wanted to see what was on the sea. Everyone in the town knew what he was thinking. Li Yunxin also knew. Wasn't he the best candidate? It wasn't hard to get to know Lu Baishui. Handsome people were hard to hate. Lu Baishui probably wanted to get to know someone who was handsome and good at martial arts. If it was a handsome, knowledgeable, well-versed man who could get along well with him, then it would be a treasure bestowed by the heavens. Li Yunxin's observation skill was the best in the world. On the first night, Lu Baishui talked to him by candlelight, regretted not meeting him earlier, and invited him to the Sea Listening Wave Pavilion. Although he approached this guy with other intentions at first. But slowly, after 4 days of interaction, even Li Yunxin also realized that this person was indeed not annoying. He was even somewhat likable. So he thought, could this guy be used? The reason why he had this idea was that there was another unexpected thing. The little demon protector that he had created had become very popular in Donghai Kingdom. Chapter 589. What was more surprising was that he didn't hear the words, little demon protection from a demon, but from a mortal. Lu Baishui. Lu Baishui's understanding of demons and ghosts was similar to that of the people in the Central Plains. He wasn't sure if the Dragon Island and Shinryu really existed, but he was sure that demons and ghosts existed. He had seen demons and even made friends with 1 or 2 when he traveled around the Midland. He had been close to Li Yunxin these days, so he mentioned it casually. He said that he was a brother of a demon near Whitewater Town, and they often talked to each other. Before Li Yunxin came he heard from that demon that something big happened in the monster realm. Shinryu and Dragon Sun created a little demon protection, to restrict the demons and ghosts in the world to do good deeds and benefit the people. From what he said, that demon wasn't a fierce demon king but a little demon. He was naturally interested in it. But the kings in other places didn't like it, so they wouldn't pay attention to it. When Lu Baishui talked about it, he showed a mysterious and proud expression which was rarely seen. Maybe this was a rare secret in the human world to him. Li Yunxin was surprised that there was a demon in the vicinity of Whitewater Town. Because after the Cloud Mountain battle, the number of demons and cultivators decreased sharply, and they should be less common than before. But then he realized that the impact of that battle on the East Sea nation should be very small, not to mention other places near the Dragon Island who would listen to Dragon Sun's call and die. But he knew that more and more people knew about what he had done. Now this legendary hero of the secular world was standing in front of him, and his face was still filled with guilt and annoyance, because of the question he had asked before. Lu Baishui was arrogant and headstrong, but he wasn't stupid. Otherwise he would have died on the road and wouldn't have lived until now. 2 years ago an outstanding woman stayed in his inn. Now Li Yunxin also stayed here. Moreover, he took the portrait and asked about it. Naturally he had to wonder if they had any ulterior motives. If it was, then he would inevitably be greatly disappointed in this person and might even become enemies. Unexpectedly, this Li Yunxin, the Li Yunxin who for the past 4 days had made him feel as if he was bathed in a spring breeze, as if he was a righteous and peaceful man of ancient times, was actually not a human. Furthermore, he was a fellow who spoke nonsense without any pressure and had no flaws. With his usual shrewdness he sensed that something might be amiss. But then he felt that his usual shrewdness was for the vulgar and the vulgar of the world. To question this extraordinary person in front of him, wasn't that an insult to his dignity? Moreover, he was forced to solemnly swear such a poisonous oath. Looking at Li Yunxin's calm face and even comforting him, Lu Baishui was overwhelmed with a myriad of emotions and felt even more ashamed. After letting out a long sigh, he slammed his fist into his palm. Good. Leave it to me. I'll prepare these days. Once I'm ready, I'll go out to sea with Brother Li. Listening to the sea and watching the waves. How can it compare to sailing directly to the sea? He learned this sentence from Li Yunxin. These days, Wei River Dragon King had told Lu Baishui a lot of strange things about the sea. Of course, it was in the way that the spring rain moistened everything silently. Li Yunxin stood up and frowned. Brother Lu. Lu Baishui waved his hand. Hey, don't persuade me. Just pretend that I'm not doing this for you. I've always wanted to go out to the sea to see what's out there and what Shinria Dragon Island looks like. Moreover, he paused and looked at Li Yunxin. Brother Li, you found the right person. Your mother has indeed gone out to sea. Li Yunxin opened his eyes wide. Brother Lu, are you serious? Yes. Lu Baishui sighed. It was last year when she came. At the end of last spring, I remember that the sea sparrows were fat at that time. I came to see if there was anything to collect. He lived in this shop. I chose this room. I talked to her for a while. I was surprised at that time. But now that I heard that your mother used to practice Taoist spells, I think it's normal. She spoke very mysteriously at that time. Li Yunxin heaved a sigh of relief. She was alone. Lu Baishui said, alone. I didn't see her being threatened or anything else. But I could tell that she was unhappy and depressed. I've never seen her smile before. Lu Baishui stopped and looked at Li Yunxin carefully. Li Yunxin sat down slowly and heaved a sigh of relief. Brother Lu, please continue. Alas. He stayed there for about 3 or 4 days and often went out. Brother Li, you know that I like to make friends with interesting people. I found someone to follow your mother. I didn't mean any harm. Your mother was good at maintaining her looks. At that time Brother Li, don't. Li Yunxin smiled. It's human nature. Brother Lu, don't take it to heart. This Brother Li had always been like this, gentle, cultured and reasonable. He didn't look like a martial arts master, but he was. Lu Baishui admired him the most because of this. So he also laughed. Later I found out that your mother asked some people in town. She asked how to go to the sea and where the Dragon Island was. She asked for about 3 or 4 days. She found a gambling addict called Li Si. Li Yunxin raised his eyebrows. Li Si. This name was given by someone else. Lu Baishui smiled. He was a fisherman. No one in this town would dare to say that he was good at sailing, could tell the weather and could distinguish between wind and rain. Unfortunately, he was lazy and liked to gamble. He was so poor that he didn't want to go to the sea. He often said that he had seen the Dragon Island and knew how to get there. But no one believed him. They thought he was trying to cheat money. I don't know how your mother persuaded him. The next day she bought a two-masted boat that used to sail along the coast. She hired a dozen boatmen and went out to sea. At that time everyone who knew about this felt bad. I also tried to persuade her. Lu Baishui shook his head. The dozen people Li Si hired weren't easy to deal with. Your mother was like that. So I thought that once she went to the sea she would be in danger. Li Si probably just wanted to cheat money. But who knew if she would think of something else? But no one could persuade her. He went out to sea that night. Now that I heard about your mother's past, I know that I worried for nothing. Those lowly things aren't a match for your mother. Li Yunxin stared at him. What happened after that? After that, it's hard to explain. Lu Baishui raised his eyes and looked outside the balcony. Originally the sky was dark and gloomy. But at this time, some orange light came from the horizon and plated the sea with a faint golden light. But this light was the setting sun. It was a gloomy day. In the evening the sea gradually cleared up. I'll take you there. Lu Baishui said, I'll tell you after we see it. Li Si. Whitewater Town in winter was gray. It also snowed but not heavily. So it melted at noon and froze in the morning and evening. The pure white snow turned into dirty ash, covering the narrow streets and low houses. The Donghai Inn was built on a cliff that was not high. On the cliff, on the slope, there were some more magnificent buildings and the road was also paved with bluestone. Along the slope, there was a large area of residential areas and restaurants. Mixed together high and low were scattered. Although it also snowed and froze, it was warmer than inland further north. According to Li Yunxin, the temperature here in early winter was about 1 or 2 degrees below zero. Even in the middle of winter, it was only 10 degrees below zero. Therefore there were still many people who came here during the winter. Because the sea near Whitewater Town was rich in several kinds of special seafood in autumn. Nowadays it was hard to travel and it was even harder to keep fresh. So it was made into pickled food. Gradually, it became a special delicacy and gradually became famous. So when the late autumn passed and winter came, when the food was pickled, people from nearby counties would come to taste it. In some people's eyes, it was a kind of life atmosphere. When they walked down the road it was just in time for dinner. Many tourists and diners from other places crowded into the street from their warm houses, rushing to several restaurants on the cliff. They were reluctant to stay but willing to eat. So they stayed in the inn at the foot of the cliff and only went to the top of the cliff when sightseeing. This was very much like Little Rock Canyon in the Yi Kingdom. It was also a high-end commercial district built high on the top of the mountain and looked like a tourist. But considering the amazing gap between the rich and the poor in this era, this marketing strategy was reasonable. After all, they only opened their doors to a few people. Thus the two of them swam against the current. Looking at Li Yunxin's clothes, it was obvious that he was a rich man. Lu Baishui's clothes were also very recognizable in Whitewater Town. So there was no crowd on the road. Those who knew him made way for him. Those who didn't also made way for him. After walking for a quarter of an hour, they arrived at the foot of the cliff and it was already dark. The lights slowly lit up and the town was no longer gray but warm yellow. Passing through a large number of low-rise houses, Lu Baishui took Li Yunxin to the south of the town. There were gradually fewer houses, and they began to see large areas of untrodden snow and withered trees propped up like poles. That's Li Si's house in front of us, Lu Baishui said to Li Yunxin as he stepped on the icy, bumpy road. And he raised his hand and pointed. There was a small courtyard in front of them standing alone outside the town. The low walls, which seemed to be made of crushed stones, were covered with yellow soil, and the roof was also covered with thatch. There were no people around and the low, lifeless hills in the distance were behind it. At this time they were still 100 steps away from the courtyard, but Li Yunxin could already hear people in the courtyard. And there were many of them. Then he noticed the road under his feet. The roads in this era were mostly dirt roads. There was a layer of snow and if there were not many people walking, only some footprints would be left. However, the road under their feet was melted and frozen and then melted again. Obviously there were many people walking on it. Li Si's house was very lively. Later only he came back. He said that the boat was destroyed in a storm. Everyone else had died but he was the only one alive. He said. Lu Baishui turned to look at Li Yunxin. Brother Li, do you know the legend of the spirit mountain on the sea? Li Yunxin thought for a while. I heard about it when I was a kid. Dragon Island is a spirit mountain, and there are also Pinglai, Yingzhou and Fenghu. They said that only the fated people can see it. Yes. Lu Baishui shook his head and looked at Li Yunxin worriedly. Li Si said that after the boat was destroyed he met an immortal, goddess Pinglai of Pinglai Spirit Mountain and she saved him. He also said that if she taught him magic he would know whether it was good or bad. Li Yunxin frowned. He's the only one alive. Lu Baishui hurriedly said, his words may not be credible. Since your mother is good at martial arts and knows Taoist magic she won't be in trouble. That's why I brought Brother Li here. Don't worry about it. Li Yunxin nodded wordlessly. Soon the two arrived outside the courtyard. Looking in through the open wooden door they saw more than a dozen people standing inside. Most of them were women and old people. Judging from their clothes they didn't have a good life. Their faces were either sad or numb. Standing in the cold wind of the winter evening, they looked into the house. The door was not closed. He allowed the cold wind to rush in. A few people were at the door and some were inside. When Li Yunxin and Lu Baishui entered the courtyard the people in the courtyard looked at them. But it was completely dark now and the candlelight in the house was very weak, so people couldn't see the people's faces clearly. So they turned their heads, shrank their necks and continued to endure the biting cold wind. The two of them squeezed forward again and someone finally saw Lu Baishui's face. His expression softened and he was about to say something. But Lu Baishui waved his hand and that person immediately stopped. After a while the people in the courtyard shrank back making room for the two. Lu Baishui whispered in the night, let's go. Go back. Tomorrow go to the East Xian and get some rice. More than a dozen people in the courtyard immediately bowed to him and left quickly. Li Yunxin nodded slightly. Brother Lu is a real hero, not a tyrant. Lu Baishui shook his head. Brother Li, you flatter me. They looked into the house together. In the main hall of the low house there was a dim oil lamp and an incense table. The incense table was big and wide and no one knew where it came from. But there were several quilts on it and Li Si was sitting cross-legged on the quilt. Li Si looked very strange. She was only wearing thin clothes, but her collar and sleeves were tightly bound. He was a very thin man but he wore makeup. His face and hands were as white as a ghost and there was a cloth bag on his head. There were several big red silk flowers on the bag and some other shiny things. It looked funny and nondescript. But now he closed his eyes, sat cross-legged on the incense table and shook his head, mumbling something. A man stood under the table, slightly bent, and looked at him nervously, as if he was worried about something. But people in the town said that this is not a celestial spell. Lu Baishui and Li Yunxin watched for a while at the door and whispered, actually I think so too. I've seen a Chuma immortal before. Do you know about it? Li Yunxin said, yes, I've heard of it. It's said that it's a monster that cultivates in the mountains and finds a fated person to be its disciple. Someone asked about divination and the demon immortal possessed the disciple's body and used the disciple's mouth to determine good or bad luck. Brother Lu, are you saying that he belongs to this category? Lu Baishui nodded. This Li Si is usually no different from ordinary people. At most he's a little confused because he came back from the sea. But when it comes to divination he's a different person. I think, what kind of demon immortal possessed him? Speaking of this he shook his head. I asked my demon brother. My brother said that this is also common. Most of them are small demons and they don't do evil, they just want to earn some merit. I don't care. Do you believe this? Yes, it's true. There's nothing to believe or not. Li Yunxin said while looking at Li Si's body. This time he carefully used his demon power, wanting to see if it was the Chuma immortal that Lu Baishui mentioned. He did see it. There was a layer of black fog on Li Si's body. It had the shape of a person but it could also be something else, a coincidence. There was indeed something attached to him. But what exactly was it he couldn't see. Li Yunxin thought for a while and frowned. At this time, Li Si opened his eyes. His body shivered first. As if someone was holding his head and shaking it from top to bottom. Then he reached out his hand to touch the few big red silk flowers on his head, and then moved his eyes to the person in front of the table and said, but what are you asking? But you're asking about your chicken? Who stole it? Hee. I know, Hey, I'm Goddess Penglai of Mount Penglai. Do you know? The person nodded hurriedly. I know. Li Yunxin let out a soft huh sound. Chapter 590. What a familiar tone. It reminded him of Mrs. Sanhua, but he knew it wasn't. A demon's aura was similar to a human's appearance, but there were slight differences. With his current cultivation he wouldn't make a mistake if he checked. But the problem was, it was very similar. The thing attached to Li Si's body spoke in a tone very similar to Mrs. Sanhua's. The aura of a demon was also very similar. He had never seen this kind of similarity on other demons. It was even smaller than the difference between Dragon Sun's aura. What on earth was this thing? Now he already knew that after he left the mountain village in Dingzhou, many things weren't purely coincidences. Some were certain and some were still questionable. But the appearance of Mrs. Sanhua, he felt that it was the former. She even appeared on Yunshan Mountain and displayed a shocking familiarity with the internal affairs of Yunshan. She was indeed hiding a secret, whether she did it intentionally or not. After the battle on Yunshan Mountain, Sanhua had disappeared, and now a similar thing had appeared here. Li Yunxin turned his face slightly and looked at Lu Baishui. But then he rejected this idea in his heart. He had already been with this person for many days. If he still couldn't see that this person might be hiding another identity, then he would be an idiot. Of course he wasn't, so that meant, maybe it was just a coincidence. This feeling made him unhappy. Coincidences meant variables that were out of his control. And in the past year there had been too many variables. He sighed lightly in his heart. Looking at the strangely sea, he twisted his body again and said, if you know, why don't you offer up the 3 animals? The 3 animals? Where are the 3 animals? Li Yunxin raised his eyebrows again. Whether it was Sanhua or this thing, they both seemed to have an unusual obsession with the 3 animals. The 3 animals. In this world it referred to pigs, cows and sheep. In this aspect it was consistent with his previous world. These 3 kinds of sacrifices were also called the prison. They were the highest standard sacrifices in this world. Since ancient times, pigs were very important to the people of all the countries in this world. Moreover, they were listed among the highest standard of offerings and had a certain sacred meaning. As far as Li Yunxin knew, in the kingdom of Qing, if someone said that this thing was dirty and disgusting, they would be sentenced to exile. After all, it was a sacred offering, so how could they allow others to defile it? Cows were large livestock used for farming in this era. It was not an exaggeration to say that they were strategic resources. As for sheep, it was a common meat on the dining table since ancient times, so it wasn't strange for it to be included. These 3 items were either sacrificed to the heavens, the earth, or the various supreme gods. The 3 flowers and this thing always said that it needed 3 animals. Li Yunxin frowned, thinking that this seemed to be a key point that he had neglected from the beginning to the end. Previously he thought that Sanhua's words were just like how people in the secular world would say, now that I have money I must do this and that. But looking at it now, there seemed to be an important inside story. The people in the room were similar to the people in the front yard. They didn't have money or knowledge. Originally they just wanted to ask the great immortal to see why their chickens were always being stolen. It was said that Li Si, the great immortal, was not greedy, and his offerings were very small. If he didn't have money he could send some vegetables and fish, or even stay and work for half a day. But now he suddenly asked for 3 animals. Where did he get such expensive things? For a moment he became nervous and said repeatedly, I don't know. Li Si suddenly laughed strangely. It was like a chicken being squeezed by the neck, squeezing out the air from its vocal cords. Hey, you know nothing. Where would you get them? Only the 2 outside have them. Ask them if they are willing to help you. As he spoke he shook his body as if he really wanted to twist and turn. But his body was stiff and he could only shake back and forth like a tree. That person hurriedly looked outside in a panic. With the dim light in the room he saw Lu Baishui's face. Startled he hurriedly said, Lord Lu, I didn't know you were here. Please. After saying a few words in fear, he hurriedly leaned his body and rubbed his way out. Only Li Si was left in the room. Lu Baishui and Li Yunqing were standing outside looking in. One of the oil lamps in the room flickered, and the room became even darker. Only then did they realize one thing. Although the door of the room was open and the cold wind of the winter night poured into the room, but the light of the oil lamp continued to shine as if it was in a quiet room. When those who came to ask about good or bad luck saw this, even if they didn't believe it, they would immediately feel that it was extraordinary. But Lu Baishui had traveled far and wide and had seen many such things. He just smiled and walked into the room. Looking around, he saw 2 old chairs near the door. He lifted his clothes and sat on them. He raised his chin and said, "Master Li and I are looking for Li Si. Where's he? Tell him to come out." Li Yunqing followed him in. He turned his hand and closed the door. The cold wind outside the room was immediately isolated, and only a soft whine could be heard. Li Si saw that Li Yunqing also sat down and he made a sound of surprise. He squinted at Lu Baishui and said in a soft voice, "Li Si?" "I am Li Si." Lu Baishui slapped the armrest of the chair and said in a deep voice, "You demon immortal. Don't be ungrateful. Do you know Taoist Chong from Surging Waves Mountain? Should I ask him to come and ask you?" Surging Waves Mountain was a small mountain more than 10 miles away from Whitewater Town. Taoist Chong from Surging Waves Mountain was the demon that Lu Baishui had a good relationship with. Not everyone knew his identity as a demon, but everyone knew his identity as Taoist Yudao. Li Si was infuriated when he heard this. He raised his eyebrows and stared at him. "Hey! How dare you?" Li Yunqing stretched out his hand and lightly knocked on the armrest. Li Si immediately stopped talking and widened his eyes. He looked at Lu Baishui and then at Li Yunqing as if he was uncertain about something. After hesitating for a while, he suddenly snorted and didn't say anything. Li Si shuddered, blinked his eyes quickly and looked at the 2 people in the room blankly. But the room was dim and it took him a while to see them clearly. He hurriedly said, "Officer Lu." As he spoke, he rolled down from the incense table. But it seemed that he had been sitting for too long, and the cold wind had been blowing for too long. When he walked, he felt like a piece of hardwood which was a hindrance to his hands and feet. He was afraid that the next moment he would fall to the ground. He had just walked 2 steps and was about to bow to Lu Baishui. Lu Baishui frowned and covered his nose. "Hey, go back. What's that smell?" Although he had traveled extensively and endured all kinds of hardships, he was not used to one thing. But there was one thing that she was not used to. She was afraid of smelly and salty things. Now that Li Si was in front of him, he could smell the fishy smell of salted fish from his body, almost choking him to tears. Li Si hurriedly stepped back and said, Officer Lu, I'm just a fisherman." Lu Baishui frowned and told him to step back further. "No wonder you wanted to open the door. The smell on your body, you should wash it off." Li Si nodded and stepped back a few more steps. At this time Li Yunqing smiled and said, "Brother Lu, you have wronged him. This smell is not something he can wash off." His tone was gentle and Li Si hurriedly looked at him with gratitude. But then he heard Li Yunqing say, "The smell of a corpse. How do you wash it off?" Li Si's originally lifeless expression froze. Lu Baishui paused and suddenly jumped up from the chair. "What did Brother Li say?" Li Yunqing was still sitting on the chair and flicked his nails. "Brother Lu, you know that my mother practiced Taoist books. After all, it is not a profound celestial art, so she taught me some. Although I don't have the ability of an immortal, I still know the principle of exorcism. So I took a look just now. This Li Si, he died long ago." After saying this, he looked up at Li Si. "Tell me, am I right?" Li Si stared at the 2 of them. His eyes slowly became fierce, and the fire in the room also flickered, casting their shadows on the wall as if evil demons were dancing. Seeing him like this, Li Yunqing sighed. It's useless to act fierce. A corpse may be soaked in the sea for a few days after it died and then salted like salted fish. Then air-dried it and used some other methods to barely maintain a human appearance. It's fine to scare others, but it can't block my brother Lu's thunderous attack. I have some soul-calming talismans here. You won't get any benefits. The 2 of us are not here for anything else." Li Yunqing looked at the fierce Li Si. "I just want to ask you how Li Si and the people on the boat died." As for the future, you can attach yourself to this zombie and absorb incense. As long as you don't harm people, no one will care. Lu Baishui looked at Li Yunxin and was a little surprised in his heart. His brother Li actually had these tricks. But then, like before, it turned into appreciation. It was because such an unfathomable person could always surprise people, not as boring as those who could be seen through at a glance. So he stared at Li Si a few times and also smiled coldly. Since Brother Li said so, it is also my intention. Whatever Master Li asks you, you will answer it. Otherwise, don't blame my pair of iron palms for being merciless. Li Si was silent for a while with a dull face, and then he laughed devilishly, no longer cowering like before. Humph? Ask me? I am Goddess Penglai. Humph, how dare you? Do you know Goddess Penglai? Although she said so, she didn't run or move. It was because of the fear in her heart. When she was talking to Lu Baishui before, Li Yunxin flicked the armrest, showing a little momentum. But even so, it was like a dragon's scales, which made this Goddess Penglai aware that there was a master nearby that she couldn't compete with. At this time, she wasn't sure whether the master was in front of the two or outside the room, so she didn't dare to act rashly. Li Yunxin ignored her bluff. He just thought for a while and asked first, "You call yourself Goddess Penglai, what is your real identity?" The demon hesitated for a moment, as if she didn't know whether she should give in and answer his question. Finally she stared at him. "Goddess Penglai, she is Goddess Penglai. Humph. She is the master of Mount Penglai, an immortal born between heaven and earth. Well, how dare you?" Lu Baishui frowned and was about to scold her. But Li Yunxin raised his hand. "Hey brother Lu, don't be impatient. Humans are the soul of all creatures. Why bother with this kind of demon?" As he said this, he reached into his sleeve and pulled out something that looked like crumbs. It was about the size of half a fingernail. "Look carefully. This is the dregs of Jinsui bolus. One piece is worth the power of incense and wishes you have collected for hundreds of years. You're smart, so it's yours." Lu Baishui didn't know what it was. But Goddess Penglai seemed to know it. Her eyes immediately widened and she seemed to be very interested. But because of this, she took a step back. Li Yunxin understood that this guy was actually very smart, although he seemed to be talking nonsense. Since he was able to casually take out something that this demon covets, his strength must be extraordinary. So although this demon was jealous, she also felt danger. It was like the instinct of a beast. In this aspect, she was very similar to the Three Flowers goddess. However, this person's words were more logical and clear than the Three Flowers ladies. Maybe because, if this person was really the master of Mount Penglai, as she said, then she should have more incense and wishes than the master of Mrs. Sanhua Temple. Demons and demons were all muddle-headed at first. The higher one's cultivation, the clearer one's mind would be. That was probably why she looked like this. Although he didn't know why she ended up here. Lu Baishui saw that Li Yunxin didn't panic in the face of this demon, and he responded calmly and firmly held the initiative, so he couldn't help but admire him more. In the world there were not many people who could talk and laugh with emperors, kings and generals in white, but certainly not few. But it was extremely rare to see someone like Li Yunxin who could chat and laugh with a demon. How could he not be happy to make friends with such a wonderful person? Goddess Penglai rolled her turbid eyes and touched the big flower on her head. She seemed to think for a while and then said, "Hey, ask me. Li Yunxin thought for a while and asked again, "Do you know a person named Mrs. Sanhua?" The demon immediately said, "I don't know." Li Yunxin responded, "So, have you seen a person named Shangguanyu?" The demon didn't even think. "No." Judging from her attitude, it seemed that she had made up her mind not to say anything. Lu Baishui frowned, but Li Yunxin was still not in a hurry. "Then tell me how you met this Li Si." The demon rolled her eyes again. He was washed by the waves into this goddess's immortal mountain, and saw this goddess's immortal palace. He asked me to save him. But he was half dead at that time. How could I save him? I just freed him. Goddess Penglai said this in a low voice and then laughed. The rest, alas, were not so lucky. They must have been eaten by the traitor. Li Yunxin turned the dregs in his fingers and calmly asked, "Who is the traitor?" Hearing this question, the demon immediately stared at him. "Traitor? Bah! I don't want to mention his name. Oh, that traitor will die a horrible death. He must be killed by that woman." "Which woman?" The demon stopped talking. Greedily looking at the dregs in Li Yunxin's hand, she blinked. Give me this first. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.